As we then go into Monday evening, still just a touch of cloud across the very far southwest of England, but for the majority of Scotland it will be staying dry with plenty of clear skies overnight, maybe one or two isolated showers just affecting Shetland and Orkney through the evening period. And across Northern Ireland, still staying dry overnight as well, plenty of clear spells here, and across Northern England and Northern Ireland we could see some patchy mist and fog developing during the early hours of Tuesday. For Wales and southern and central parts of England though, another dry night, plenty of clear spells around, still one or two showers just skirting the very far east of England, but for most places it should be staying dry overnight. As we head into the early hours of Tuesday morning, that's when we start to see that mist and fog developing across Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England and Scotland too, as we go into the start of Tuesday. And temperatures overnight under those clear skies likely to be dropping a bit chillier than we've seen recently, down into the low single figures, with a bit of a frost likely across the northern half of the UK to start on Tuesday. So a chilly start for many places, but mostly a dry start. Some of that mist and fog perhaps a little slow to clear across Northern Ireland, but for most of us it will be another dry day. Plenty of sunshine around, still some showers just lingering across the very far southeast of England, these perhaps turning heavy at times, but temperatures will be similar again on Tuesday, around about average for the time of year, so 11 or 12 in the south and 10 or 11 further north.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's only 2 weeks remaining to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag will get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Monday, the 11th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Today, we remember those who gave their lives to keep us free. On the 11th day of the 11th month, at the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Keir Starmer is in Paris to deliver that message, the first time a British Prime Minister has attended the French ceremony since Winston Churchill. But could his visit to see Emmanuel Macron be primarily focused on the new challenge of handling Donald Trump?
Yes, Donald Trump has already been in conversation with Vladimir Putin over Ukraine. Could the president-elect now expect a united Franco-British proposal to boost weapon delivery ahead of his inauguration?
And amid it all, the COP climate conference kicks off in Baku. The Prime Minister will jet there after his meetings with Macron. And on the agenda, cash, cash, cash. Developing countries want your money to deal with the effects of climate change. Will the Prime Minister hand it over? Yes, so once again, we're being asked to cough up more money for climate change measures around the world. They want a $1 trillion pot now of money to send to developing countries to help them with things like climate change mitigation, climate finance. What do you make of that, Tom?
$1 trillion is about a third of the entire British economy. Obviously, the Brits won't be asked to provide it all, but a significant sum will have to come from us, with the 6th largest economy in the world. It does seem that these climate conferences are getting more and more frequent. I know they're once a year, but my goodness me, I've now covered, I think this is the 4th I might have covered for GB News.
You went to Glasgow, didn't you?
I went to Glasgow,
yeah.
COP26 as it was. I spent 2 weeks up there. It was a carousel. I mean, my goodness me, the amount that was going on there, the sort of silliness around the fringes, but also the intense negotiation that goes on there, and then the binding agreements that are come up with all of these countries. Big question mark now with this one is, of course, because I think it was COP22 or 23 was the Paris Accords, and everyone signed up to that. When Donald Trump became president in 2016, he pulled America out of that agreement. Big question mark over whether the world's largest economy will actually sign up to anything that's agreed in Baku.
It's a bit farcical, isn't it, really? Because as far as I know, the United States aren't present there. Joe Biden's not there. India's not there. And China's not there. And guess what? Those are the 3 biggest carbon emitters in the world. So we're going there as our little country, which doesn't emit all that much in terms of emission. Less than 1% of emissions. And yes, you could say some of that's exported around the world through manufacturing and whatever. But we're a small country with regards to carbon emissions. But we're going to be there, you know, leading the agenda, saying how much money we should give to other countries to help them with their climate change crusade. Does it stack up?
Well, it'll be interesting to see what is put together at the end of this long conference. Conference of the parties. That's what COP stands for. Parties to all the agreements over the years.
And they seem to be getting more frequent.
But this one is, of course, about cash, cash, cash. What do you think about it? Do you want your money going to some of the developing countries so that they can have lovely new infrastructure to protect from climate change? Or do you think that should be spent here? gbnews.com/your say. All to come after your news headlines with Katie Bowen.
Tom, Emily, thank you and good afternoon. Your latest headlines from the GB Newsroom. The nation fell silent a short while ago to mark Armistice Day, honouring the moment peace was declared in 1918 on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month with a 2-minute silence. A service has taken place at the Cenotaph in London, where wreaths have been laid and prayers have been read, and a procession of the congregation set off a short time ago. Senior representatives of the Armed Forces and the Ministry of Defence have attended a service at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. The Duchess of Edinburgh also spoke at the service. Our reporter Charlie Peters spoke to Honorary Vice President of the Western Front Association, Lady Lucy French, about the importance of today.
For me, it is incredibly important. It's vital that we do continue to remember, that we do fall silent at 11 o'clock. It's part of humanity. And the instance that we begin to forget, or I think we're all...
The Prime Minister has marked Armistice Day in France today, becoming the first UK leader to do so since Sir Winston Churchill. Sir Keir Starmer was invited to Paris personally by the French President Emmanuel Macron. And a short time ago, the two leaders were at the tomb of the unknown soldier at the Arc de Triomphe, where they laid a floral tribute. It comes as the government announces more than £10 million to mark the 80th anniversaries of VE and VJ Day in the UK next year. Minister for Veterans Alistair Cairns spoke to Eamon and Isabel this morning.
Well, I think going out there makes absolute sense from my perspective. The war was fought in France, so being alongside the French to remember those that have fallen is fantastic news, and I fully support it. I had the privilege yesterday of marching for the first time in the front rank of veterans past the cenotaph, and it's a moment for this country to reflect and remember the sacrifices of so many people who laid down their lives to protect the freedoms we enjoy. So the PM going over to France is a good thing to stand along the French and remember the sacrifice that took place.
Some brief breaking news this afternoon. Former soldier Daniel Khalif has pleaded guilty partway through his trial at Woolwich Crown Court to escaping from HMP Wandsworth in September 2023, but continues to deny all other charges. The 23-year-old escaped from HMP Wandsworth in southwest London in September 2023 by clinging to the underside of a food delivery truck using a sling made from kitchen trousers. Khalif faces charges contrary to the Official Secrets Act and Terrorism Act and is accused of perpetrating a bomb hoax. The Kremlin has today denied reports that US President-elect Donald Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin, casting the media reports as pure fiction. The Washington Post and Reuters news agency both previously reported that the call had taken place. It comes as Joe Biden is reportedly set to make a personal plea to Donald Trump about the importance of funding Ukraine, urging the president-elect not to walk away from the country. Elsewhere, Defence Secretary John Healey has rejected reported comments by Ukrainian officials, suggesting that Kyiv is unhappy with the Labour government's level of support. It comes after The Guardian reported officials in Kyiv have said relations have deteriorated since Labour took office and voiced frustration over Britain's failure to provide additional long-range weapons. More than 2 million GP appointments are at risk from changes being made to national insurance in the Chancellor's budget, new analysis from the Liberal Democrats has shown. The Institute of General Practice Management has estimated that the average GP surgery's tax bill will go up by around £20,000 a year after Rachel Reeves increased employers' national insurance contributions. That would amount to more than £125 million a year in additional costs for GP practices in England, the equivalent costs to providing 2.24 million appointments. The NHS and the public sector are exempt from the employers' national insurance tax rise, but most GPs, many of which are run as small businesses, will be hit. The annual UN climate conference is getting underway in Azerbaijan today, with world leaders, including Sir Keir Starmer, attending the summit over the next 2 weeks. The climate negotiations are set to discuss funds for poor countries to cope with climate change and increasing ambitions on cutting emissions. The meeting is being held after the latest deadly weather events, including floods in Valencia and the Hurricane Helene in the US. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now let's go back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 8 minutes past midday. And today, of course, is Armistice Day. Earlier this morning, Britain fell silent to remember our fallen heroes. On this day in 1918, peace was, of course, declared in Europe, bringing an end to more than 4 years of intense fighting.
Sir Keir Starmer marked the occasion at a ceremony in Paris this morning, the first Prime Minister to do so since Winston Churchill. He laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier alongside British and French veterans.
While services of remembrance have also taken place across the UK, as Defence Secretary John Healey laid a wreath at the Cenotaph in Whitehall this morning.
OK, well, for more on this, we're joined now by Paris columnist at The Telegraph, Anne-Elizabeth Moutet. And thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show. So we want to know why Keir Starmer chose to spend Armistice Day in Paris with Monsieur Macron.
would imagine that now is the time for France and Britain to talk about Ukraine, apart from the ceremonies, and the ceremonies matter, and Emmanuel Macron feels very strongly about most sort of remembrance ceremonies. But I would say that considering the outcome of the American election, France and Britain, who are the two main military powers in Europe, and the only nuclear powers in Europe, wanted to sort of compare notes and see how they could reply to whatever comes out of the Trump presidency. There have been strange declarations from the Trump presidency team, including the son of Donald Trump, who sent an extremely unpleasant tweet to President Zelensky saying your allowance stops in 38 days. Essentially, we're turning off the taps. It's not sure whether American foreign policy is going to be determined by the son of the president, who this time conducted an extremely disciplined campaign. So we'll see whether his White House is as disciplined as his campaign. But that is certainly something of interest to the French. That's something of interest to Britain. The sending of weapons and the deciding of a common policy is something that's very important, especially at a time when Germany is almost without a chancellor since he fired his foreign minister a couple of days ago. So it's a really important moment, especially at the time when we've got a war on the soil of Europe again, for the French and British Prime Minister to get together.
So interesting that although all the briefing and all the press about this visit is how it's all about Armistice Day, this is the first visit on this day since Winston Churchill, that actually behind the scenes this is much more about current affairs, current wars than wars past, and particularly that Donald Trump is at the forefront of this conversation. There is some reporting today that there could be a joint British-French agreement on weapons delivery that could be done with Joe Biden in his remaining sort of lame duck days in the presidency, that more weapons could be sent to Ukraine before Donald Trump gets to the White House and is inaugurated on the 20th of January. Do you see that as a realistic possibility in these final 2.5 months that the current status quo has?
I think there is a sense of emergency. The reaction to both Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer, and I think even more Keir Starmer, to the advent of Donald Trump is one of dismay because they didn't see it coming and they don't know how to do it. Macron used to deal pretty well with Donald Trump at the beginning, but at the end of the day, they were in complete disagreement. They were on disagreement with the climate objectives. They were in disagreement with many things. So there's this sense of urgency, but there's also the sense of urgency that here is one instance in which they could do some good together, as opposed to the many times when they've scuffled and when both of their in both cases the ratings are at record lows. Emmanuel Macron is incredibly unpopular right now in France, and he is only powerful still for foreign policy and defense policy, because that is in the remit of the president, even if his party has lost the elections. The situation is not quite like that, but certainly he's not supposed to interfere so much on anything else. But that's exactly his job right now. And I think, lest we forget, actually also applies to what's going on in Ukraine right now.
And more broadly, is this trip not an indicator that perhaps Keir Starmer is more Team Europe over Team USA? We've seen a lot made of, Kemi Badenoch, for example, now the Tory leader, saying that, Britain should focus, Keir Starmer should focus on that trade deal that we started with the United States of America, yet we see Keir Starmer spending a huge amount of time on the continent.
I think Kemi Badenoch is entirely right on the trade deal, because that is the one thing that actually might get Brexit to work. It would be something that would offset the loss of free trade with Europe in some respect, and it would also be something that would counteract the protectionism that is going to be decided upon by the Trump administration, in which they promised, and they usually try and sort of hold by their promises. So that is also important, but one doesn't preclude the other. In this case anyway, it's interesting because we know perfectly well that not only is Keir Starmer less sort of interested in the American alliance as somebody like sort of Liz Truss or Boris Johnson were, but also the reactions of members of his own government were incredibly anti-Trump. They now sort of surface because you cannot say something and hope that it will be forgotten. The sort of getting European relations better is really important. Keir Starmer also saw the French Prime Minister, Michel Barnier, and his name is better known in Britain than most French Prime Ministers because he's the one who negotiated Brexit. And in his job now as Prime Minister, it will be to try and get alliances for France as well in things like trade, where it belongs, it's his remit. But also in general, I think Macron and Barnier are in agreement on this one.
Really, really interesting stuff. How all of these different interests collide. But also, thank you so much for reminding us just how unpopular Emmanuel Macron is in France right now. Same with Olaf Scholz. Same with Keir Starmer. Same, frankly, with Joe Biden. Incumbents around the world having a really tough time of it. And Elizabeth Moutet, thanks so much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain.
Yes, Keir Starmer could be creating these very close relationships with leaders of countries that, well, they're not going to be leaders for very much longer, perhaps. We shall see.
Well, our national reporter, Charlie Peters, can join us now from the Cenotaph in Whitehall, because in this country it has been focused on that day of remembrance. Charlie, just remind us what's happened today.
Well, Tom and Emily, we had the Armistice Day service finishing just in the last half hour or so. It was about a 45-minute long ceremony, and it was solemn and poignant. Mostly silent, as several prayers were read out, and of course the last post played soon after the 2-minute silence at 11 o'clock, because it was the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month when the guns fell silent on the Western Front in 1918. I think it's worth remembering that for most of our lifetimes, Armistice Day has been around, but between 1946 and 1994, it disappeared from the British national consciousness. It wasn't commemorated as we saw it done here earlier today, because Remembrance Sunday took over in 1946 with the Second World War and the great energy caused behind remembering that conflict, sort of capturing what had existed before after the First World War. But the Western Front Association felt as though it was vital that we recaptured that First World War commemoration, and so they launched a campaign which successfully returned Armistice Day to Whitehall, to the Cenotaph, and to the front of this country's remembrance period. So we've seen now Whitehall has reopened. We've seen some people walking past paying their own respects to the war dead, the dead from the Great War, and it was very nice to see actually here this morning several medals from the First World War being worn by family members of those who fought in that conflict. It's always great to see those campaign medals and those items of tin that commemorate heroism, and also being sent to theatres all over the world from a period over 100 years ago. People here present to remember their forebears and indeed their forefathers. So yes, it was a moving ceremony attended by cadets, which also demonstrates the sort of cross-generational links between this country and its relationship with Remembrance. We also saw the wreaths being laid by several members of the government, and also from the British Army's Football Association. And I don't think people are really aware of the links between football and the First World War in particular, because so many people who were playing top flight football at the time went over to serve with their communities. Entire towns, of course, completely changed by the First World War. And sport was also a really important part of the First World War experience. For many people who served from 1914 onwards, they were actually almost relieved that the war had started, because for the first time in their lives they were being paid to play cricket and play football with their friends. The army saw sport as a wonderful opportunity to gather esprit de corps and to create those bonds of brotherhood that could be replicated on the front lines. And so I think that's why we saw a captain from the Royal Military Police laying down a wreath on behalf of the Army's Football Association, central to the commemorations of the Great War this morning. But also Armistice Day, you know, it's about that period, it's about the 11th hour, but it's also about celebrating the triumph as well of the First World War. I think in our modern understanding, our modern consciousness of the First World War, we always think of it as lions led by donkeys and an appalling just abyss of suffering. For many people who served in that war and who spoke about it afterwards, they were grateful that they were able to fight, grateful that they were able to win, and that they were able to bring freedom and greater security to the conflict.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlie Peters, our national reporter there at the Cenotaph in Whitehall. And thank you, Charlie, for bringing us such excellent coverage throughout the morning on this, well, special day.
Absolutely, no, it's been absolutely fantastic work that Charlie's been doing, and the whole GB News team down there, and across the country. But this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more coming up on today's programme, including the latest on the Environmental Summit in Azerbaijan. How much could it cost us?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Recruiters are warning that if you're not tech-savvy, you could be missing out with your CV failing to make it through an AI-powered sifting process. So we've gone from sort of computer says no HR people ticking boxes to AI, right? Is that right?
Yes, well, this applies once you're in the job as well, as a recent report revealed that employees expect AI will manage an average of a third of their tasks within the next 12 months. Well, joining us now to discuss this is Cosmo Curry, founder of Van Kuysen, a leading company in technology recruitment.
Morning, Cosmo.
Morning.
Good
Hi,
morning.
Ben.
Well, yeah, thank you for joining us. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because AI is, of course, on the rise, and now in the workplace and in universities and things. Another article came to mind. There was a student recently, I think it was in the news just the other day, that got in trouble for using AI. So there's, you know, for exam purposes and essays. So there's lots of different ways that it can be a good thing and a bad thing. But you're, of course, here to talk about the ways in which AI is a good thing within the workplace.
Absolutely. I mean, AI is here to stay, for sure. And we're seeing this rise of people using it in such a clever format. And the other side of it is also we're seeing people who are using it and during the process of that, they are losing their character. We're losing the actual insight into the individual behind that. And so we've kind of got this kind of mix. And I think AI is phenomenal when you're looking at it from a point of view of optimization, point of view of speed, getting results. But I think we have to remember that, you know, the fundamental of recruitment is people. And we cannot substitute the people, the personal aspect, by replacing that with AI.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Good afternoon, Britain. It's 23 minutes past 12. And yes, as we were saying, world leaders are heading to COP29. That's the annual UN climate meeting to tackle climate change.
Ironically, taking place in oil-rich Azerbaijan this year. Well, the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, is seeking to lead the world in achieving decarbonised electricity grid by 2030. But could Donald Trump now jeopardise this global green agenda?
Well, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Yes, yet again, in an oil-rich nation. And China aren't there, the United States aren't there, India aren't there, the three biggest global carbon emitters, but Ed Miliband and team will be.
Yes, I mean, it's important to say that there will be sort of lower functionaries from all of these countries doing negotiations, but not the leaders. And I think the leaders is a really important point here because it shows the sort of seriousness with which each country is taking this conference. And this conference this year is all about global climate finance, i.e. taking money from richer countries and giving it to poorer countries, not just in order to sort of deliver green energy projects, but also to mitigate against the effects of climate change, which is going to be a more and more sort of, it's going to become an issue at the forefront of more people's minds. Big questions then going to be asked. Well, why aren't we creating more flood defences in this country? If we're giving billions of pounds to this global climate fund for poorer countries, I mean, shouldn't some of that money be spent on protecting us from increased flood risks?
I'm sure other countries in Europe are asking the very same question. Spain, Italy, perhaps Germany too.
The Netherlands not asking that question at all, though, because they're very, very good at all their dikes and dams.
But don't you remember a few weeks ago we were talking about how the World Bank had lost track of billions of climate funds. They didn't know where it had gone, what it had been spent on, what it had been used for, whether it had been effective at all, whether it had reached any targets that they'd set. So can we trust that this money will actually be spent on mitigation and saving lives and the like?
Turns out giving billions of pounds to some of the least reliable regimes in the world might not be the brightest thing to do. But our political editor, Christopher Hope, has been following the Prime Minister and will be jetting off with him over to Azerbaijan in the next hour or so. So let's listen to what he had to say.
After Donald Trump's extraordinary win in the US election, the international order is still making sense of what will happen next. Today, Sir Keir Starmer has been in Paris, where he's met with French President Emmanuel Macron and the French Prime Minister Michel Barnier. He's been the first British Prime Minister to be here on Armistice Day, where he's paid respects to the war dead since Winston Churchill in 1944. From here in Paris, he flies to Baku, where he'll be the only significant world leader, along with the Italian Premier Meloni, to try and discuss where next with cutting climate change emissions. It's called the Finance COP. They'll look at ways to try and encourage developed nations to try and cut their emissions and also look at new targets for 2035. But the elephant in the room is Donald Trump. That overshadows all talk of politics whenever world leaders gather. No wonder we've heard from Number 10 already reportedly saying they want to make as much use as they can between now and January the 20th, when Trump is sworn in as the next president of the United States. And in Baku, big questions there about the commitment of America to cutting fossil fuels. The word from Mar-a-Lago has been drill, baby, drill. And that's why all the talk there will be about Donald Trump, and he's miles away in hot Florida.
Drill, baby, drill. Sounds almost a little bit racy, doesn't it? But yeah, lots of you have been getting in touch. You don't think that Keir Starmer should be prioritising money to go on climate change in developing countries.
Isn't it
that's for sure.
That Keir Starmer's going and Giorgia Meloni's going. Olaf Scholz isn't going. Of course, he's got his own domestic political issues. Emmanuel Macron, who's just been meeting with Keir Starmer today, he's not going to Baku. He's not going to this climate conference. I mean, the Prime Minister, along with the Prime Minister of Italy, are sort of the only two significant European leaders there.
I mean, you've had the pleasure of going to one of these COP conferences. OK, so tell me, is it just a jolly for climate charities, climate think tanks, public policy advisors, SPADs and politicians, including minor politicians?
It's a story of two halves. So,
halves? Are they halves?
In Glasgow, when I was there was the entire sort of carousel and sort of all of the lobbying organisations, events that are being put on, people that are being wined and dined, a sort of exhibition floor of all sort of companies that want various subsidies for the tech that they're delivering and all the rest of it. And there's that whole jamboree. But then you sort of go through this peculiar little wind tunnel and are
taken
to sort of these prefab sheds. I'm sure it's more glamorous in Baku, but they've got lots of money from the oil that they produce. But in Glasgow, you went through to these other sheds, and it was just room after room after room of very, very plain sort of wooden tables, doors that sealed, international negotiators sitting there and thrashing out what is an agreement that they work 2 weeks on. The politicians come and go over the course of one day or two. They come for the photo ops, they come for the meet and greets, for the dinners, but it's actually the country negotiators that are doing all the hard yards and the working. And so, I mean, perhaps Keir Starmer's trip is no more than presenting a sort of level of seriousness, sort of that the UK is taking this seriously. But let's be real, he's not doing the negotiation. His advisors aren't doing the negotiation. I mean, it's going to be teams of civil servants there from every country that are doing that in the sort of hidden bit of COP, away from where all the fun and sort of jamboree is.
It just annoys me. So an oil-rich nation is hosting COP, which is all about getting rid of fossil fuels. OK, so Azerbaijan's suddenly going to say, you know what? We're going to stop drilling. We're not going to drill. We're not going to sell any oil on the international market. No, that's us done. We're going to build more wind turbines, and that's sorted. Also, how much carbon emissions are there in all of these leaders, all of these advisors, all of these civil servants, all of these lobbyists going off to Azerbaijan this year? Where was it last year? The UAE?
Yes.
And then it was Glasgow, and, you know, next time it might be in Mexico.
Sharm el-Sheikh it was as well.
Sharm el-Sheikh.
There's been in lots of oil-producing nations recently.
Interesting. Why do you reckon that they want to host COP?
But doesn't it say something that the UK, our big attempt was to lead by example, right? So we've stopped new exploration in the North Sea, we've banned fracking, and our hope was that every other country would follow us in doing that. You know, we do this first, we stop making all the money that we make from hydrocarbons, great, and everyone else will follow us. I'm yet to see that the second half of that equation has quite gone as perhaps the politicians had hoped.
Is there a little bit of self-sabotage going on here? Let us know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Now, up next, the Archbishop of Canterbury is refusing to resign following a damning review into allegations that the Church of England covered up suspected child abuse. We'll have the details next after your headlines.
Tom, Emily, thank you. Your top stories this hour. The nation fell silent this morning to mark Armistice Day, honouring the moment peace was declared in 1918 on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month with a 2-minute silence. A service has taken place at the Cenotaph in London where wreaths have been laid and prayers have been read, and a procession of the congregation set off a short time ago. Senior representatives of the Armed Forces and the Ministry of Defence have attended a service at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. The Duchess of Edinburgh also spoke at the service. The Prime Minister has marked Armistice Day in France today, becoming the first UK leader to do so since Sir Winston Churchill. Sir Keir Starmer was invited to Paris personally by French President Emmanuel Macron. And a short time ago, the two leaders were at the tomb of the unknown soldier at the Arc de Triomphe, where they laid a floral tribute. It comes as the government announces more than £10 million to mark the 80th anniversaries of VE and VJ Day in the UK next year. Minister for Veterans Alistair Cairns spoke to Eamon and Isabel this morning.
Well, I think going out there makes absolute sense from my perspective. You know, the war was fought in France, so being alongside the French to remember those that have fallen is fantastic news. And I fully support it. You know, I had the privilege yesterday of marching for the first time in the front rank of veterans past the Cenotaph, and it's a moment for this country to reflect and remember the sacrifices of so many people who laid down their lives to protect the freedoms we enjoy. So the PM going over to France is a good thing to stand along the French and remember the sacrifice that took place.
Some brief breaking news this afternoon. Former soldier Daniel Khalif has pleaded guilty partway through his trial at Woolwich Crown Court to escaping from HMP Wandsworth in September 2023, but he continues to deny all other charges. The 23-year-old escaped from HMP Wandsworth in southwest London in September 2023 by clinging to the underside of a food delivery truck using a sling made from kitchen trousers. Khalif faces charges contrary to the Official Secrets Act and Terrorism Act and is accused of perpetrating a bomb hoax. And finally, more than 100 firefighters tackled a large blaze in the Welsh town of Abergavenny overnight. Gwent Police and 14 fire crews were called to the scene on Frogmore Street in Abergavenny at around 8:30 p.m. last night. A charity shop and other nearby buildings have been destroyed, but no injuries have been reported. Around 12 nearby residents were evacuated to Abergavenny Leisure Centre. The leader of Monmouthshire Council has said that they have now left. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello and welcome back to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Last week we had the anti-cyclonic gloom. The next few days we've still got high pressure, this time without the gloom. It's much brighter for many of us. Still some patchy cloud around because we've got some areas of cloud floating around the high pressure from the Atlantic. But as this front clears, it clears the low cloud, the really gloomy stuff. So a much brighter day to come for the vast majority. Still some low cloud and mist clinging onto the southwest of Cornwall. But elsewhere across the UK, well, yeah, there's some high cloud about, but otherwise it's a brighter day with some decent sunny spells developing and feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine, although a cold wind blows through the north of Scotland and down the North Sea coast. That wind will also bring some showers into the far north of Scotland and also eastern parts of England, prone to 1 or 2 showers as we end the day. But for the vast majority, it's a dry and clear end to Monday. Already by this stage, some mist patches starting to form across Northern Ireland, Northern England, central and southern Scotland. And really with those clear skies remaining overnight and a relatively cold airflow, we're going to see increasingly some mist and fog developing, especially for Ireland and into the West Midlands, Northern England, central and southern Scotland. Where that fog forms, it will be dense with some poor visibility by dawn. Equally, we've got a few showers rolling into the southeast of England, but elsewhere, away from the fog and away from the showers, temperatures dipping close to freezing. So a chilly start to Tuesday, and the fog, where it ends up, will be slow to clear, especially for Northern Ireland and central Scotland. But away from the foggy areas, well, plenty of bright weather once again. A few more showers into the southeast and a cold wind here, but in the sunshine elsewhere, feeling pleasant enough.
The latest GB News travel.
Delays on the southbound side of the M1 to an earlier accident between 29A from Markham Vale through to Chesterfield and Mansfield at 29. It's slow through the ongoing roadwork area, even though all lanes have reopened. Northbound on the M1, it's slow to earlier debris on the road between 32 for the M18 interchange to Catcliffe at 33 for Sheffield and Rotherham. Northbound on the M6, long delays, 2 lanes are closed. It's queuing traffic for 4 miles to an accident at Junction 8. Delays are to after Junction 6 for Spaghetti Junction. It has cleared though for the westbound side of the M4 at Reading, Junction 11, an earlier broken down vehicle removed, and in Neath and Port Talbot, the westbound side of the M4 cleared at 41 for Baglan. Again, a broken down vehicle has been removed. So across the UK, that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 37 minutes past midday. Now, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, is facing mounting pressure to resign today, all following a damning report into the suspected abuse of over 100 children by a well-known barrister associated with the Church of England.
Yes, the report also claims that the institution had played a role in covering up the accusations when details initially came to light in 2013.
Well, 3 members of the Church's Parliament have started a petition calling for Mr Welby to resign, all over failures to follow up on those accusations.
OK, we're joined by historian at the New Culture Forum, Philip Kisley. Philip, thank you very much indeed for joining us. How serious is this for the Archbishop?
Hi, both. It's great to speak to you again. It's as serious as it can get, really. This
is abuse that happened in the 70s and 80s. It came to light in 2013. Justin Welby knew about it. There are, as you say, Tom, over 130 boys who've been violently abused here, violently and sexually abused. 2 of these boys were hit over 8,000 times. Okay, and this cover-up is pretty typical. The abuser, John Smythe, died in 2018. So, like Jimmy Savile, he has escaped justice. And this is one of our great institutions failing children again. I think one of the key things here is the idea of justice should be public. It's the old adage, justice should be seen to be done. And perpetrators need to be publicly shamed. If you are indulging in shameful and sadistic acts, then you need to be shamed for 2 reasons. Because that is a kind of punishment, but also it's a deterrent to other people. Now, that's massively important when it comes to child abuse, okay? And I think I'm just worried about what else is going to come out because this has been, let go. How many other instances have been swept under the carpet?
I mean, this is an extraordinary story from start to finish. The story said by some of these victims, shocking, appalling, but also a mysterious death of a boy under the care of Mr. Smythe in 1992 in Zimbabwe. I mean, he hopped from country to country and seemingly none of the accusations were followed up until it was far, far too late. But what more could the Church of England have done, given that this was a man who didn't always base himself in the United Kingdom?
I think they could have shouted it from the rooftops. And I don't think where he did it matters so much. I think it's something that, as I mentioned Jimmy Savile before, and I think it kind of reverberates through our society. We've got this problem now. And I think it was happening in 2013. I think this was when it was really beginning to start. There's a tension between affirmation on the one hand and safeguarding on the other. And when children and women are involved, safeguarding always goes by the wayside, doesn't it? So we've heard just recently about a biological male now, we know, boxer, who was put in a boxing ring with women to beat the living daylights out of them, to affirm a particular gender agenda, okay? We already have this as well, don't we? We've had it in schools. We've got the trans thing in schools. So rather than just immediately going to this affirmation of ideology, we need to think about the safety of individuals, not just this affirmation of groups and group identity.
And Philip, just
to make the point, Emily, the group here, of course, is the Church of England. It's one of our great institutions.
And one of the things here is that Justin Welby is very happy to make public statements. He's very happy to take a strong stance on controversial issues, whether it's anything from racism, Black Lives Matter, to the Rwanda scheme, which I believe he called ungodly. So he's very happy to take a stance when it comes to issues that he perceives to be about social justice or unchristian. And does this make the accusations of a cover-up here all the worse?
Yes, I think it does, because it's on the one hand, it's gross hypocrisy, okay, and people loathe that, and people absolutely loathe that when it comes to the sadistic abuse of children. But it calls into question, actually, what he thinks Christian charity is. If he's looking at an abuser of children, an abuser of boys, and saying, oh well, that I'm assuming there's some kind of mechanism of forgiveness that's gone on there, and he's certainly forgiving himself in his own mind through his, in relation to his negligent actions. I don't understand, and again, this is a big thing in our society. I don't understand what the moral code is here. Everything seems to be upside down. It seems to be that the victims are being punished, and they're being punished because they're getting no justice, Emily. And the perpetrators are getting off scot-free. we've got a real problem. Yes, it's been going on for years, and of course we had a different kind of problem in the 70s and 80s where people just got away with these things. We haven't moved on because people are still getting away with them. The problem now is that people are making ridiculous excuses for the most vile behavior, and it's time we really began to interrogate these moral codes, this ethical framework we have, and tear it apart and start again.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Dr. Philip Kisley, historian at the New Culture Forum. Great to have you on. Thank you. I mean, if you're happy to, use your position to talk about all the social justice issues under the sun, whether it's economic inequality, whether it's, the Rwanda scheme, whether it's Black Lives Matter, all of these things, but when there's a real injustice in your face and you choose to ignore it,
no,
what does that say?
Astonishing. I think the other thing that we haven't mentioned here is that John Smythe, the man allegedly behind all of this horrific abuse of young boys, acted for Mary Whitehouse as her lawyer when she went after LGBT publications in the 1980s and 1990s and sort of censored sort of all sorts of gay literature and all the rest of it. Meanwhile, that's what he was doing with young boys. I mean, it's astonishing, the hypocrisy and the lies and the cover-up and the deceit at every single level of this story.
Yeah, I wonder if all the sort of wokery is perhaps, a deflection tactic. I don't know. In response to the review, the Archbishop of Canterbury has said in a statement, "I recognise the courage of those victims, including those related to John Smythe, who have come forward and relived their trauma through contributing to this review. I know their willingness to share their painful testimonies will come at a great personal cost. I had no idea or suspicion of this abuse before 2013.
Nevertheless, the review is clear, the Archbishop adds, that I personally failed to ensure that after disclosure in 2013, the awful tragedy was energetically investigated. Since that time, the way in which the Church of England engages with victims and survivors has changed beyond recognition."
OK, well, there's the statement from the Archbishop himself. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Coming up, we have an exclusive clip from tonight's bombshell interview with Boris Johnson, courtesy of Patrick Christie's. That's next.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Let's speak now to Charlie Mullins, who's the founder of Pimlico Plumbers, and entrepreneur Oliver Hodgson. Really good to see you both this morning. Charlie, let's start with you. Has working from home and the culture surrounding working from home killed work experience, do you think?
Undoubtedly. Many companies now are not getting youngsters in for the work experience because of the fact they don't have the staff in. So if they're only in 2 days a week, they're not going to get in the youngsters. They've got no one to train them. So it's killed it totally. And if you think it's bad now, probably 4 or 5 years from now, it'll be absolutely ridiculous. This working from home, I said from day one, is going to kill youngsters' futures, youngsters' careers, and getting people into the workplace. So now the damage is showing through, unfortunately. COVID finished a couple of years ago. The working from home should have stopped and get people back into the workplace.
I mean, Oliver, you have to say it's difficult to see how people in a work-from-home environment can do any sort of on-the-job training at all.
It's really interesting, the work experience piece, actually, because we run an internship program in the summer here. We had 5 people in the office in person and they really thrived, but we did have a couple of people who joined remotely because of their own reasons, right, and where they were. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that as well, because I've got clients who have completely remote teams. Now, I don't. I have an office and our team are based in here, but our clients who do, they're able to offer work experience opportunities digitally with fantastic technology to people across the world, right? So they have people in their team who are working from all sorts of different continents, which is obviously fantastic. But I agree with Charlie, right? You cannot knock in-person engagement. You cannot knock being in the office.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 10 to 1, and we have to say there's a big bombshell interview on this channel tonight.
Yes, GB News presenter Patrick Christie's, he sat down with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, where he grilled him on everything from COVID to Brexit to immigration, amongst much more.
Indeed. Well, here's a little teaser of Boris Johnson addressing those sky-high migration numbers that, of course, surged during his premiership. Let's take a listen at his defence.
Now, you can say that the numbers were too high, and I'd accept that. But never forget, it was we who controlled it, because we took back control with Brexit. And in future years, we can say no. We can say we've got enough. We don't need any more.
Part of it because of Brexit.
It sounds like Patrick's about to press him again on that. He said, well, we can control it now. We can control it now, thanks to Brexit, OK.
I mean, it's true. It's completely true that he introduced a system that had all of these levers and knobs that you could control. It's just he then turned all the levers up to max.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to find out exactly, his reasoning for that. Was there a reasoning? Was he pushed in that direction? Is he just generally liberal on the issue of immigration?
Although it must be said, of course, the lowest level of migration that we had, in the last 30 years was in 2020.
Yeah, so that was a freak incident.
Yeah, so to some extent, some of that then upbound was the lack of the. It makes
excuses.
It's the sort of area under the graph matches. But it's interesting because you see in all of these countries, and I was looking at a graph of this the other day, you look at what happened to immigration in Ireland at the same time, immigration in France, immigration in the United States, immigration in basically any major democracy in 2021 had the highest level it had, in recorded history. I'm fairly confident in saying that. So what I'm saying is that there was some sort of global phenomenon here that wasn't unique to the UK. The UK certainly had a big spike that was determined by decisions that politicians made. But in a lot of countries, politicians made those same decisions, countries that have control over their borders.
And by doing so, completely ignored their populace. Completely ignored their voters.
But I mean,
don't want immigration to be sky high in all of these countries.
They don't. But at the time, you also had huge, and I remember the cacophony of noise that was being made across all the papers and all the rest of it. We need more visas for HGV drivers. We've got a crisis.
Well, hang on. What happened with the HGV drivers was yes, you didn't have, all people coming in on visas. What happened is the value of that job went up, and people started, training to do it or coming back out of retirement. If there's a shortage of something, the price of it goes up, the value of it goes up, and hey presto, we had enough HGV drivers all of a sudden.
Right, but of course,
it paid more.
But the most damaging question you can ever ask a politician, or the most damaging statement that someone can possibly make, is something must be done. Politicians don't want to sit on their hands and let the market fix the issue. They want to be seen to be doing something. And all around the world, when you had these supply chain issues that were caused by the pandemic, you had the risk of high inflation, you had the risk of all of these different sort of knock-on effects. One of the things that politicians were told by economists, one way to fix these issues was import more people. And politicians thought, we're in a global crisis. Oh no, I'm getting shouted at left, right and centre. Nothing works. Let's turn
immigration
those migration
is not a
levers
short-term fix, is it? It's not a short-term fix.
As in the people
You can't switch, yes. You can't just, like, switch it on and off unless you put everyone on temporary visas, but we know that it, you know, then people get leave to remain and they settle here and they have a child or whatever and they get married, whatever, and it just goes on. So I don't think it should be used as a quick fix. Totally lazy. Well, totally lazy from our politicians across the Western world, I would argue.
Yeah, but it is an important point to make, that these were decisions that politicians made. And I think sometimes the language around we've lost control of our borders. No. They were in control, they just made different decisions.
Yeah.
And these decisions can now be litigated.
Well, you can tune in at 9 o'clock for the full interview. I think it's going to be very interesting indeed. Patrick pushes him on a lot of key issues. That's after the weather.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Up until yesterday, some parts of the UK had 0 hours of sunshine so far this November. That's all about to change. Still some patchy cloud, but increasingly sunny spells over the next couple of days as a cleaner area of high pressure builds in, this time without the gloom. Having said that, there is still some low cloud as we end the day across the far southwest of Cornwall. It's a patchy cloud elsewhere, but it's less low and less widespread, and so it's a clearer night for many places. Under those clear skies, nevertheless, there will be some fog forming, especially for Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England, Southern Scotland, as well as the West Midlands. That fog will cause poor visibility first thing, so watch out for that. But where we don't have the fog, actually a bright start to the day. A chilly start, a frost in places, particularly for central and northern Scotland. But actually, bright skies and mostly dry with light winds for many. It's going to be pleasant enough. The dense fog across Northern Ireland could be slow to clear, might last all day in 1 or 2 spots, equally for Northern England and Southern Scotland. But for much of the rest of the UK, well, a fine start to Tuesday beckons, and we'll see some showers just brush the far southeast, but these will come and go, and they will be largely confined to coastal parts of Norfolk, Suffolk and Kent. Now into Tuesday afternoon, some cloud will build, but the best of the sunshine remains across the southwest, as well as parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland away from the mistier areas. It's going to feel pleasant, with temperatures reaching 10 to 12 Celsius, but a cold wind continues to affect East Anglia and the southeast. That's the wind that will bring in the showers, and they'll continue overnight. And where we see some clear spells, once again, a few fog patches will return. But otherwise, Wednesday's a reasonably bright day, cloudier skies in the north, and a return to some cloud on Thursday as well.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, I have a very special edition of Patrick Christie's Tonight coming your way this evening.
And I'm thrilled to be appearing on the Patrick Christie Show tonight, going on from 9 till 11. It's going to be an absolutely epic show in which we're going to be discussing, amongst many other things, the significance, the causes of Donald Trump's sensational victory and what lessons that may have, if any, for this country and the world.
There's only 2 weeks remaining to win Christmas on Us this year. First, we'll give you £20,025 in tax-free cash. Then we'll give you £5,000 to spend on all of your Christmas presents, with a further £500 in vouchers to spend at your favourite supermarket. Finally, a GB News Christmas goodie bag. You'll get it all in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Well, drinkers have been warned about a drop in the quality of French wines after poor weather conditions hit this year's grape harvest. Winemakers across France will make 240 million fewer bottles of wine this year. the country's farming ministry said on Tuesday. So should we think of switching from French to English? I'm joined now by sommelier and founder of Inflorescence Wines, Jacinta Madison Williams. Hello, Jacinta.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. First of all, let's just think about the poor French.
We should.
Has this been a fairly universal weather catastrophe for France?
It has. Kind of across the board, we're about 22% down on last year's crops, which is quite significant. I think it's like one of the 4 years over the last century that have been this low. So. And
it's affected both quality and quantity?
I would say more so quantity. There's always ways of counteracting quality. It depends if people are desperate to make wine. They can obviously push out more watered down grapes. There's been a lot of rain, if you hadn't noticed. Not only in France, we felt it here too. But lots of frost, supercell hailstorms have completely wiped out some crops. So in some cases, there's nothing to make. In other cases, it's just really watered down grapes and you want to pick earlier to make sure you're avoiding all those rains. But I would say more so it's quantity. But saying that, France is still the biggest producer of wine in the world. It might be taken over by Spain this year, but as a consumer, don't panic. We're not going to run out of wine. And we obviously have lots of lovely wine growing here now in England. So whether we do make a little jump for a bit to English wine, but there's definitely still lots out there.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Monday, the 11th of November. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Keir Starmer, he's in Paris for talks with Macron as he marks Armistice Day in the French capital. But could his visit to see Emmanuel Macron be primarily focused on the new challenge of handling Donald Trump?
Yes, Donald Trump has already been in conversation with Vladimir Putin over Ukraine. Could the president-elect now expect a united Franco-British proposal to boost weaponry deliveries ahead of his inauguration?
And amid it all, the COP climate conference kicks off in Baku. The Prime Minister will jet there after his meetings with Macron. And on the agenda, guess what? It's cash, cash, cash. Developing countries want your money to deal with the effects of climate change. Will the Prime Minister hand it over?
But in brighter news, the Princess of Wales is progressing in her recovery after returning to duties by joining other members of the royal family at the cenotaph yesterday and on the balcony.
And guess what? Tomorrow is.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this. You will not want to miss this.
It is the Fury on the Farm special of Good Afternoon Britain. I am going to be going all the way down to Barnstable to find out exactly what life is like on a farm.
Now, Emily, it's fair to say that you're a city girl.
City gal. Yes, although I do enjoy the countryside. But yes, I have
Will this be your first time mucking in on a farm?
What do you think, Tom?
I think it might be.
It will be, but you know what? I like a bit of graft.
Yeah.
And I like to help out. And with all this talk about how these tax changes, how the budget, how Rachel Reeves is going to be hitting the family farm, I am going to a family farm to be amongst the cattle, the sheep, the pigs, the horses, and of course the farmers to find out exactly what's going on. What are they worried about? Are they going to be coming down to London on November the 19th to protest?
I enjoyed that list there. Sort of, I was imagining field by field, you know, horses, pigs, sheep, and then just a field of farmers, all sort of, you know, bustling together, penned in. No, actually one of the farmers of the farm that you're going to is someone we've interviewed on this channel, on this show. A lovely bloke, and he's going to be showing you exactly
James Wright.
And he's going to be showing you exactly sort of how a farm works, what to do on it, and how much graft is involved in the whole thing.
Yeah, because there seems to be this assumption by some of our metropolitan establishments, should we say, that, you know, these rich landowners just sit on their land and they just use it for, you know, money purposes, tax purposes. And yes, you know, if you have £3 million of farmland, yes, just pay it all to the state after you die. But actually, let's find out how these farms actually function and how difficult it actually is and how much graft goes into it. So, yes, I'm going to be waking up very early in the morning and I'm hoping to appear in a different part of the farm every time I speak with you. So I could be on a tractor, I could be mucking out the pigs, I could be frolicking with the sheep. Who knows? Who knows?
It's a shame we're doing it this close to winter, because we should send you back there in the summer and then you could shear some of the sheep. That would be a fantastic... I used to go to the annual game fair in this country, where farmers would go on. It was sort of a display thing where, you know, the sheep are just sort of too woolly and they all get sheared for public... you know, it's a great entertainment.
I'm just looking at my notes here. I am going to be mucking out the cows and moving the cows, including the pregnant heifers.
Fantastic.
So there you go. That's something to tune into.
Oh, I hope the pregnant heifers, like maybe one of them sort of starts to give birth early. That would be an amazing moment. Live on national
I'm not sure
television.
people want to see that. Anyway, gbnews.com/you'll say get in touch, but it is your headlines with Katie Bowen.
Tom, Emily, thank you and good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. Your latest headlines from the newsroom. The nation fell silent this morning to mark Armistice Day, honouring the moment peace was declared in 1918 on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month with a 2-minute silence. A service has taken place at the Cenotaph in London, where wreaths have been laid and prayers have been read, and a procession of the congregation took place. Senior representatives of the Armed Forces and the Ministry of Defence have attended a service at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. The Duchess of Edinburgh also spoke at the service. The Prime Minister has marked Armistice Day in France today, becoming the first UK leader to do so since Sir Winston Churchill. And ahead of the commemorations, the two leaders spoke about the war in Ukraine and the situation in the Middle East. The two leaders laid a floral tribute at the tomb of the unknown soldier at the Arc de Triomphe. According to a Downing Street spokesman, the two leaders also spoke about the situation in the Channel, with them strongly agreeing on the importance of bearing down on illegal migration at every stage of a migrant's journey. Minister for Veterans, Alistair Carnes, spoke to Eamon and Isabel this morning.
Well, I think going out there makes absolute sense from my perspective. You know, the war was fought in France, so being alongside the French to remember those that have fallen is fantastic news. And I fully support it. You know, I had the privilege yesterday of marching for the first time in the front rank of veterans past the Cenotaph, and it's a moment for this country to reflect and remember the sacrifices of so many people who laid down their lives to protect the freedoms we enjoy. So the PM going over to France is a good thing to stand along the French and remember the sacrifice that took place.
Elsewhere, the Kremlin has today denied reports that US President-elect Donald Trump spoke with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, casting the media reports as pure fiction. The Washington Post and Reuters news agency both previously reported that the call had taken place. It comes as Joe Biden is reportedly set to make a personal plea to Donald Trump about the importance of funding Ukraine, urging the president-elect not to walk away from the country. Elsewhere, Defence Secretary John Healey has rejected reported comments by Ukrainian officials, suggesting that Kyiv is unhappy with the Labour government's level of support. It comes after The Guardian reported officials in Kyiv have said relations have deteriorated since Labour took office and voiced frustration over Britain's failure to provide additional long-range weapons. The number of small boat migrants crossing the English Channel is likely to hit 40,000 by the end of the year, according to maritime security sources, as almost 33,000 have now made the illegal journey so far this year. Over the weekend, a further 781 migrants crossed from France. The latest crossings come just days after Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer entered into a new agreement to intercept criminal gangs smuggling migrants through the Western Balkans. Sir Keir announced deals to boost intelligence sharing and cooperation with Serbia, North Macedonia and Kosovo. A Home Office spokesman said, "We will stop at nothing to bring the people smuggling gangs to justice." Former soldier Daniel Khalif has pleaded guilty partway through his trial at Woolwich Crown Court to escaping from HMP Wandsworth in September 2023, but continues to deny all other charges. The 23-year-old escaped from HMP Wandsworth in southwest London in September last year by clinging to the underside of a food delivery truck using a sling made from kitchen trousers. Khalif faces charges contrary to the Official Secrets Act and Terrorism Act and is accused of perpetrating a bomb hoax. More than 100 firefighters tackled a large blaze in the Welsh town of Abergavenny overnight. Gwent Police and 14 fire crews were called to the scene on Frogmore Street in Abergavenny at around 8:30 p.m. last night. A charity shop and other nearby buildings have been destroyed, but no injuries have been reported. Around 12 nearby residents were evacuated to Abergavenny Leisure Centre, and the leader of Monmouthshire Council has now said that they have left. The annual UN Climate Conference is getting underway in Azerbaijan this morning, with world leaders, including Sir Keir Starmer, attending the summit over the next 2 weeks. The climate negotiations are set to discuss funds for poor countries to cope with climate change and increasing ambitions on cutting emissions. The meeting is being held in the wake of the latest deadly weather events, including floods in Valencia and Hurricane Helene in the US. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. Let's go back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1. Now, Sir Keir Starmer marked Armistice Day at a ceremony in Paris this morning, the first Prime Minister to do so since Winston Churchill. He laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier alongside British and French veterans.
Yes, Starmer met with French President Emmanuel Macron ahead of the commemorations, discussing how to put Ukraine into the strongest possible position going into the winter.
Well, the leaders also strongly agreed on the importance of bearing down on illegal migration, as Starmer set out his mission to disrupt and deter smuggling gangs across Europe.
OK, well, for more on this, we're joined by political commentator Benedict Spence. Benedict, why do you suppose Keir Starmer chose to spend Armistice Day in Paris? Is it all about the political?
I imagine it is. It's something that, as has just been alluded to, doesn't actually happen very often. Possibly it should happen more, given that that's, where a large proportion of the war was fought on the continent. But I think that it is rather telling that this has happened right off the back of Donald Trump's victory in the United States. And all the noises that have been coming out of Paris in particular, but other EU capitals as well, that this might be the moment that Europe has to sort of look to itself and forge its own path going forward. How viable that is, I'm not sure. I think Britain now finds itself in a very interesting position where it's going to find itself being courted, I think, a lot more by both the US and Brussels, having been slightly shunned by them for some time. But at the same time, there are going to be trade-offs that come with that. So, Keir Starmer has talked about wanting to reset the relationship with Europe. I'm sure that this is partly a symbolic gesture towards that end. But ultimately, the direction of travel may not be in Europe's favor. Obviously, this is going to be about Ukraine to a great extent. Donald Trump's election is a cause of great concern for the Ukrainian government in terms of what it fears might be imposed on it. Europe and the UK have talked a good game on supporting Ukraine for as long as possible. But the reality is, Europe is entirely dependent on the United States for its own security infrastructure, so quite how long Europe can continue to prop up Ukraine without explicit US support, that's anyone's guess.
Well, I think we should come on to that question of UK-US relations in a second, but to look at Ukraine more deeply, this could be, for want of a better word, the final push. I mean, the time at which Donald Trump is inaugurated in late January, it could be the case that lines are frozen and that is the negotiation point. There's going to be some real pressure for Ukraine to make significant advances, or at least try perhaps an enormous offensive in the 2 months and a half they have left before Donald Trump becomes the US president.
I mean, in reality, Ukraine doesn't have those resources. It no longer has the manpower, I think, certainly to push beyond. What we saw in Kursk, I think, was an attempt to draw Russian forces away from other parts of the line in order to weaken them, to then allow for a push. But actually, it hasn't had that effect. And everyone knows as winter sets in that part of the world, it's not really a viable strategy to push on in through the cold. Russia is much more in favor of a war of attrition. We've seen this for a very long time. And as much as we are talking about Ukraine being brought to the table, increasingly, the longer that this goes on for, it's less in Russia's interest for there to be a peace deal, because Russia can actually demand a lot more from those wanting to push Ukraine to the negotiating table. The moment for allowing Ukraine to have Western weapons and to use them in Russia was years ago, frankly, and the feet dragging on this from European capitals and from the United States is what has led us to this point where Donald Trump would probably like to get this wrapped up very quickly because US resources need to be sent elsewhere. This is a very unpopular war in the United States. But right now, the best case scenario is almost certainly territorial concessions, not necessarily by Kiev. Kiev doesn't have to agree to say Crimea is Russian, but the United States saying, look, in return for effectively a rebuilding economic package for Ukraine, we in Washington, we get to say, OK, Crimea is Russia, perhaps Mariupol is Russia, perhaps Donetsk or Luhansk, they are disputed, but that'll be the terms of the agreement. And for as long as this goes on, it becomes a lot harder for Ukraine to actually turn down any sort of package to help rebuild the country.
Very interesting. And what are the chances of the new Labour government picking up where the Conservatives left off with Trump in terms of a US-UK trade deal?
I think politically they will not have the gall to do it. I don't think they'll have the bravery, because it's far too easy in the UK to go, oh, Donald Trump, he's dreadful, and oh, that Elon Musk, isn't he dreadful? Progress is a dirty word in the UK, and that's what these people are all about. We don't want that sort of thing. It's terribly gauche to want to build things in the UK or want to improve your economic situation. So I think politically it's very difficult for Keir Starmer, and also not really in his ideology, I think, to want to get into bed with Donald Trump, no matter what deals he may offer. There's been all of this talk, of course, that the US may impose tariffs, it may not impose tariffs on certain European countries, maybe on the whole of the European Union. There may be exceptions for other countries. I think Italy is pushing very hard. Hungary is another one that is pushing very hard for it to have its own little exemptions. But this is all part of a broader strategy, basically to bring Europe to heel. And you do have to say that for as long as Europe decides, not just the UK, for as long as Europe decides that it doesn't like the idea of technological or economic progress, the entire continent, the entire bloc becomes completely vulnerable to those states that do want these things. That means petro states like Russia, like the Gulf. That means mass producers like China. And of course, that means the United States. So ultimately, for as much as it may be politically more palatable for Keir Starmer to go, OK, let's have closer relations with Europe, long-term, Europe is almost certainly going to be dragged into the US's orbit, whether it likes it or not. And the question that Keir Starmer has to ask is, do we want to be dragged behind the Europeans, or do we want to get out in front of them?
It's so fascinating. I mean, there is this sort of golden opportunity for the UK to escape a fate that will be tremendously economically damaging to most European countries. If the US whacks double-digit tariffs on this sort of standard basic tariff for all countries around the world, you dance like you really do want a trade deal with the United States. It becomes so much more imperative. It's not a nice to have. It's a sort of must-have if you want to keep your economy ticking over as it is. I mean, 1 million people every day work for US firms in the UK and vice versa. It's our single largest trading partner. The idea that we could have tariffs, more tariffs and more extreme tariffs, very, very concerning. But Benedict, as you say, I mean, where's the political impetus here? I mean, the easy thing for Keir Starmer to do now is sit on his hands and pretend this was all out of his control.
I mean, the dreadful irony, if I could just finish on this, is that it is people who claim that they are very pro-globalization and very open to the world, who are the ones that are absolutely convinced that you can only trade with your closest geographical trading partner. The future is true globalization, and that means partners halfway across the world. It's a shame that Labour hasn't quite got the memo and still thinks it's our next-door neighbours that the future lies with.
Yes, it does seem as though Keir Starmer is more comfortable on the continent, judging by the number of recent trips, that is. Benedict Spence, thank you so much, political commentator. Great to have you on the show.
Well, we're going to return now to that big talking point that, of course, Starmer and Macron were discussing earlier this morning, the war in Ukraine.
Yes, last night, US President-elect Donald Trump reportedly issued a stern warning to Vladimir Putin on a phone call, advising him not to escalate the ongoing conflict. The Kremlin has since denied that call ever took place.
Well, we know we can always trust the Russians. Of course, perhaps I'm going to believe the American press on this one. But Trump has previously said he would find a solution and end the war within a day during his election campaign.
But will this become a reality? And what will a Trump presidency mean for Ukraine's defenders? OK, well, joining us now to discuss this is Ukrainian MP Andriy Osadchuk. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That question to you, how are you feeling about Donald Trump, president-elect? He'll be in the White House very shortly.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here. So it's not really very shortly. So inauguration will happen on January 21st. So we have a couple of months to finish all of the business with the Joe Biden administration. But seriously speaking, a lot of manipulation about what was Trump saying during his campaign. But we all shall be extremely aware that it was election campaign. And he was speaking not to you, not to me, not to European partners of Ukraine, but he was speaking to his voters. And it was absolutely clear a technological thing, because he was fighting for victory on elections. So that's why I don't think that we shall take extremely seriously everything what was said by him about the war in Ukraine and his relations with Vladimir Putin. Secondly, I don't think that for this very moment, Trump knows exactly what he will do. with Putin and with the Russian aggression in Ukraine. Till today, he did not appoint his cabinet. So we don't know finally who will be the people responsible for Trump foreign policy. Absolutely sure that Trump will play the leading role in this, but all others are also important. So that's why I think we need to wait a little bit to give more time for Trump to decide on his strategy. But talking about future, I have almost zero doubts that he will try to do, as we say, a deal. That's typical for Donald in his previous interaction as the president of the United States. But I'm sure that for the moment, he does not have enough information and understanding what's going on, how everything was started, and how far everything went. I'm sure that he will try, but I don't see any political grounds for any deal with Russia. Because unfortunately for us, for everyone on the West, the word negotiations, when it is pronounced by Putin, means surrender of Ukraine and the West. Everyone shall remember how everything was started in January 2021, February 22, sorry, when in fact it was a blackmail of NATO and G7. And Putin aggression against Ukraine started, as he said, because Russia has no security guarantees from NATO, meaning that it was and it is a war against NATO and the West. Until today, Putin wants everything. So that's why I'm sure that Trump administration will try. I'm almost sure that they will fail to reach any deal. And yes, I think that the aid to Ukraine can be limited in January, February, but I very much hope that in April, May, we will be able to renegotiate with the Americans everything and to continue our joint work.
That is interesting, Andrei, because I think a lot of Americans believe that if sort of the Americans and the Russians come to an agreement, then the Ukrainians would obviously just sort of fall into line. Are you saying that that's less likely to happen, and that even though Trump might come to some sort of deal with Putin over some sort of territory being handed over, I mean, could there be some sort of guerrilla campaign that goes on for years and years and years? We've seen asymmetric warfare in so many parts of the world, with the sort of less well-equipped side being able to make a real nuisance for any invading occupier. I mean, we've seen it in so many countries. We've seen it in Afghanistan, we've seen it in Iraq, we've seen it, frankly, in Vietnam. We've seen it everywhere, where potentially the less well-equipped side can still be a real nuisance to any occupying invader, as long as the people still believe in it. Is it possible for Trump to hand over Ukrainian territory if the Ukrainians living there won't accept Russian governance?
So first of all, don't forget that we're talking about largest country in Europe. Ukraine larger than France, and it is the war in Europe. And the role of European Union is huge. The role of UK, by the way, is extremely important. And I don't see any chance for Donald Trump to reach any agreement with Kremlin, ignoring the position of European Union, which officially till today is extremely strong. Yesterday we met Mr. Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union in Kiev, and he was repeating again and again that Europe will never step back. So that's issue number one. Secondly, again, we shall not speculate on anything about concession of any Ukrainian lands, because from one side, it is not acceptable for Ukrainian people who are suffering from Russian war crimes for third month at war. Thirdly, it is contradiction to all rules, written and unwritten rules of the global security architecture, which was built after the Second World War. It is directly contradict to Helsinki Act of 1975, which nailed down all the borders in Europe. So that's why we need to think globally, that it's not Ukraine on the stake. We are talking about global and especially European safety and security order.
Andrei, thank you very much indeed. We'll have to end the interview there, but I'm sure we'll speak again. Andrei Osadchuk, Ukrainian MP, thank you very much. Lots to think about there.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. And coming up, we tackle the upcoming COP29 Climate Summit and find out why the world's biggest polluters have dodged the conference.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
This is reported in the Telegraph today, and it's about being white or being coloured or being anti-racist. Is Monopoly a racist game?
This is an incredible story, actually, I have to say. I'm reading this from the Mail. It's in Telegraph as well, but from the Mail. Children should be playing Monopoly to learn about racial privilege, councils claim. White players should be given more money, spend less time in jail, and also be given a head start on buying property to convey inequality and white supremacy. And this all, I'm not making this up, and this all comes from a document called How to Raise Anti-Racist Children, which was drawn up for the Barbie manufacturer Mattel in 2020, and it's been endorsed, or at least circulated, by Leicestershire County Council, Southampton City Council, Lambeth London Borough and City of London Corporation, who apparently think this is a sensible way to go forward. I mean, for goodness sake, Monopoly is just a bit of fun, isn't it? Let's just enjoy it.
It's a wonderful example of how anti-racist thinking becomes racist. What they're saying is that white children should be given privileges on the Monopoly board.
Because they've got it in real life.
So that they learn that they already have privilege. Do we really think children are going to think that? Or do we really think children are going to think, oh, great, I have an advantage? White children are going to think, great, I have an advantage.
They're going to think, oh, no, I've landed on Mayfair and there's 4 houses there.
It's wonderfully stupid.
We've also heard it with nursery rhymes as well, though, haven't we? And mums and dads being told not to sing Bar Bar Black Sheep.
That's in the story as well, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's steeped in white culture. And what a lot of nonsense that is as well.
What are you meant to sing instead?
Well, Bar Bar, I don't know, White Sheep, perhaps, I don't know.
Or Rainbow Sheep or something.
Wah Wah White Sheep. You can say Wah Wah White Sheep as they play Monopoly with their privileges.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello again. Well, world leaders are heading to COP29. That's the annual UN climate meeting to tackle climate change that appears to be happening more often.
Yes, even though it is annual, this is the 4th COP we've covered on GB News, if you can believe such a thing. I mean, extraordinary. Ironically, taking place in the oil-rich Azerbaijan this year. Well, the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, is seeking to lead the world in achieving decarbonised electricity grids by 2030. But could Donald Trump jeopardise what's known as the Green Agenda?
Well, we're joined by our political correspondent, Olivia Rutley. Olivia, interesting that Keir Starmer is heading to COP. We know that lots of leaders have decided to opt out of this year's one.
Copped out.
Copped out, yes, they've copped out of COP29. I imagine that at COP29 there's going to be a lot of discussion about how damaging Donald Trump may be for the climate agenda.
Yeah, I mean, it is very interesting that Keir Starmer is one of the only really major world leaders who will be going to COP29. Emmanuel Macron's snubbing it, Olaf Scholz is snubbing it, Joe Biden's not going, Ursula von der Leyen isn't going. I think, yes, when he gets there, we can expect to see Trump at the very, very top of the agenda. Trump is promising to pull America out of that Paris climate agreement yet again. He did that last time he was president, and he's saying he'll do it again. So these countries who are heading to COP now will be talking about ways that they can mitigate for that, ways that they can make sure that the rest of the world is holding true to its climate targets. The UK says that it wants to be a major leader in this field, and Ed Miliband and Keir Starmer will be bigging up that narrative, but with very few world leaders there of a major kind to sort of impress, it might be that their calls fall on deaf ears. I think what also is going to make things quite difficult for them is that BP, which is obviously a London-listed company, has actually said that it's going to spend $8.5 billion in the next few years drilling for oil and gas in Azerbaijan, which slightly undermines Keir Starmer's narrative. It's going to be a bit of a tricky one, I think, because Donald Trump will be so far up that agenda. And the truth is that it is going to be really, really tricky for these other countries to try and plug that hole left by America. There are calls for these developed nations to be spending $1 trillion on helping underdeveloped nations fund the cost of climate change. Now, if you had America in the mix helping that funding, then that might be an achievable target, but without America it will be very difficult indeed, and I suspect that's not a pledge that Donald Trump will be willing to sign up to.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed, Olivia Rutley, our political correspondent. We're now joined by author and senior fellow at the US-based Real Clear Foundation, Rupert Darwell. Rupert, interested to find out what you make of this $1 trillion pot that countries are going to be asked to contribute to. This is to help developing countries deal with the effects of climate change and presumably build green technology and the like. Do you think that's something that taxpayers around the world will want to pay for?
Good afternoon. Yeah, you and Olivia are absolutely right. This conference is fundamentally about money. The idea that it's actually about decarbonisation targets is really for the birds. This is fundamentally about money. Ever since Hillary Clinton went to the Copenhagen COP in 2009 and put $100 billion promise $100 billion promise of climate funding on the table. It's really been about money. But the problem is there's no amount of money that can compensate developing countries for decarbonising their economies, because the first thing they've got to do is carbonise their economies. If they want to grow rich, you have to carbonise.
And yet, will many countries be keen to sign up for something that, in the end of the day, looks like many of these countries might have dropped that dream of keeping global warming below 2.5 degrees? It seems that perhaps this conference could shift a global worldview of trying to stop climate change to mitigating the effects of climate change.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of truth in that, but you won't hear the global South giving up their demand for money. And yes, it's not a popular call for Western politicians to make, saying we want to give this money to the global South, which is one reason why the President-elect Trump will pull out of the Paris Agreement a second time, and it's a big ask for Britons who just enduring one of the biggest tax-raising budgets ever to see some of that money just being pushed abroad.
I mean, Rupert, the likes of Ed Miliband would probably say that developing countries don't need to carbonise, that they can bypass that stage of industrialisation and development and just invest in green technologies with the help of some of our cash. And they don't need to ever be carbon-emitting nations. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's a completely fabricated argument. It just doesn't stand up to reality. The fact is that the world, you cannot do without fossil fuels. That Coal, for example, is the cheapest way of generating electricity, which is why China is a coal-based economy, why India is building more coal-fired power stations, why Indonesia is a huge consumer of the coal that it actually has of Indonesian coal. So it's simply not going to happen. And the fundamental problem with wind and solar is their intermittency, that when the wind stops blowing, the sun stops shining, basically you lose.
And we've seen that this week, haven't we? We've seen that already, that the wind produced zero in the way of power, right at the time that Ed Miliband is trying to cut our reliance on gas and other horrible fossil fuels. But Rupert Darwell, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you very much indeed, author and senior fellow at the US-based Real Clear Foundation.
Yeah, fascinating, isn't it? You get these wind droughts, and wind power is all very well and good when the wind's blowing, but either you need huge, expensive batteries, a backup gas grid, water pumped storage. It's sort of for every wind turbine you build, you have to build something else to take that storage and sort of balance the grid when the wind doesn't.
What do you make of COP? Is it just a talking point? Let us know. Talking point, talking shop. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Talking COP.
Talking COP. Up next, police are set to deploy 4,000 officers for the France-Israel match on Thursday amid the violent outbreak in Amsterdam. Mark White will have the latest.
Very good afternoon. Your top stories from the newsroom this hour. The nation fell silent this morning to mark Armistice Day, honouring the moment peace was declared in 1918 on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month with a 2-minute silence. A service has taken place at the Cenotaph in London, where wreaths have been laid and prayers have been read, and a procession of the congregation took place. Senior representatives of the Armed Forces and the Ministry of Defence have attended a service at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. The Duchess of Edinburgh also spoke at the service. Well, the Prime Minister has marked Armistice Day in France today, becoming the first UK leader to do so since Sir Winston Churchill. And ahead of the commemorations, Sir Keir Starmer and President Emmanuel Macron spoke about the war in Ukraine and the situation in the Middle East. The two leaders laid a floral tribute at the tomb of the unknown soldier at the Arc de Triomphe. According to a Downing Street spokesman, the two leaders also spoke about the situation in the Channel, with the leaders strongly agreeing on the importance of bearing down on illegal migration at every stage of a migrant's journey. Minister for Veterans Alistair Cairns spoke to Eamon and Isabel this morning.
Well, I think going out there makes absolute sense from my perspective. The war was fought in France, so being alongside the French to remember those that have fallen is fantastic news. And I fully support it. I had the privilege yesterday of marching for the first time in the front rank of veterans past the Cenotaph, and it's a moment for this country to reflect and remember the sacrifices of so many people who laid down their lives to protect the freedoms we enjoy. So the PM going over to France is a good thing to stand along the French and remember the sacrifice that took place.
Former soldier Daniel Khalif has pleaded guilty partway through his trial at Woolwich Crown Court to escaping from HMP Wandsworth in September 2023, but continues to deny all of the charges. The 23-year-old escaped from HMP Wandsworth in southwest London in September last year by clinging to the underside of a food delivery truck using a sling made from kitchen trousers. Khalif faces charges contrary to the Official Secrets Act and Terrorism Act and is accused of perpetrating a bomb hoax. The number of small boat migrants crossing the English Channel is likely to hit 40,000 by the end of the year, according to maritime security sources, as almost 33,000 have now made the illegal journey so far this year. Over the weekend, a further 781 migrants crossed from France. The latest crossings come just days after Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer entered into a new agreement to intercept criminal gangs smuggling migrants through the Western Balkans. Sir Keir announced deals to boost intelligence sharing and cooperation with Serbia, North Macedonia and Kosovo. A Home Office spokesman said, "We will stop at nothing to bring the people smuggling gangs to justice." Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's time for your finance report.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2885 and €1.2093. The price of gold is £2,063.85 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 8,128 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello and welcome back to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Last week we had the anti-cyclonic gloom. The next few days we've still got high pressure, this time without the gloom. It's much brighter for many of us. Still some patchy cloud around because we've got some areas of cloud floating around the high pressure from the Atlantic. But as this front clears, it clears the low cloud, the really gloomy stuff. So a much brighter day to come for the vast majority. Still some low cloud and mist clinging onto the southwest of Cornwall. But elsewhere across the UK, well, yeah, there's some high cloud about, but otherwise it's a brighter day with some decent sunny spells developing and feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine, although a cold wind blows through the north of Scotland and down the North Sea coast. That wind will also bring some showers into the far north of Scotland and also eastern parts of England prone to 1 or 2 showers as we end the day. But for the vast majority, it's a dry and clear end to Monday. Already by this stage, some mist patches starting to form across Northern Ireland, Northern England, central and southern Scotland. And really with those clear skies remaining overnight and a relatively cold airflow, we're going to see increasingly some mist and fog developing, especially for Ireland and into the West Midlands, Northern England, central and southern Scotland. Where that fog forms, it will be dense with some poor visibility by dawn. Equally, we've got a few showers rolling into the southeast of England, but elsewhere, away from the fog and away from the showers, temperatures dipping close to freezing. So a chilly start to Tuesday, and the fog, where it ends up, will be slow to clear, especially for Northern Ireland and central Scotland. But away from the foggy areas, well, plenty of bright weather once again. A few more showers into the southeast and a cold wind here, but in the sunshine elsewhere, feeling pleasant enough.
The latest GB News travel.
I'm John Vincent. We're seeing slow traffic on the M60 anti-clockwise near Manchester, just past junction 15, the Swinton interchange. It's also slow for the M1 southbound in Derbyshire due to an earlier accident in the roadworks area between junction 29A Bolsover and 29 for Chesterfield. Long delays on the M6 northbound in the West Midlands. 2 lanes closed for an accident at the intersection with the M5 at junction 8. Queues going back to just after junction 6 Spaghetti Junction. Slow for the M11 northbound in Essex. There's been an accident between junction 8 Bishop Stortford and 9 Saffron Walden, although it's now been moved to the hard shoulder, so those queues should soon start to ease. And we're seeing delays on the M3 northbound in Surrey. 2 lanes closed for a car fire between junction 3 Lightwater and 2 for the M25. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's now 20 to 2, and French police are set to deploy 4,000 officers for the France-Israel international football match.
Yes, the match will come a week after Maccabi Tel Aviv fans were hunted down and attacked by hordes of pro-Palestinian protesters in Amsterdam.
Well, the Israeli government has warned citizens abroad to avoid sporting and cultural events, including in this country.
Well, our security editor Mark White joins us in the studio. Mark, 4,000 police officers just for one football match.
There's serious concern about the potential risk. The police chief in Paris has been saying that this match itself, following the events that took place in Amsterdam a week ago, are considered to be high risk. Now, we remember those events where we saw Maccabi Tel Aviv fans being hunted down and attacked by hordes of fans during or after the game in Amsterdam. There have been some incidents of flags that were torn down by, it's alleged, the Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters on their way to the stadium. But when they came out of the stadium, and you can see some of the images there, there was what the authorities in Amsterdam said a concerted campaign of anti-Semitism where groups, some of them on scooters, others on foot, were hunting down those who looked like they were Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters and kicking them to the ground, beating them up. Some were thrown in the canals. At least one person run over as well. 30 of those fans were injured. 5 required hospital treatment. And of course, the scenes absolutely condemned. But some real concern about the potential for other Israeli supporters, either football clubs or just representatives of their country, being targeted in other European countries. And the first real test of this will be this coming Thursday, a week to the day since these appalling scenes in Amsterdam, where the French national team take on Israel in a Europa Nations League match. That's going to be attended by the French president, showing his support to of course, the French team, but also in a show, the French government say of solidarity for Israelis and what they went through in Amsterdam. But those extra police will be on duty around the Stade de France, the main stadium where the game is taking place, but further into Paris as well, on the metro systems and around the main central areas of Paris.
And the Israeli government saying that actually they don't want their citizens to even go to this match. I imagine there still will be many fans who want to and will do so. Do we have any idea of how many Israelis may be coming to Paris?
There will be thousands of Israelis that will want to attend the match and to be there despite the warnings that are coming out from the National Security Council in Tel Aviv. And they are understandably concerned because anti-Semitic attacks throughout Europe are up 400% since the atrocity on the 7th of October last year in Israel. And I mean, if you look at the UK, it's actually up 581%. But France also has suffered a very significant increase in anti-Semitic attacks. There have been stabbings against Jewish people. A young Jewish girl, 12 years old, was raped in an anti-Semitic attack. Synagogues and other places of worship for the Jewish community have been attacked. So
and even before October the 7th, let's be frank, there were people who were fearing the rise in anti-Semitic attacks even before this all kicked off.
It's been on an upward trajectory for quite a number of years.
And Mark, let's not beat around the bush. I mean, the majority of people carrying out these attacks in Amsterdam last week seem to come from migrant backgrounds, seem to have personal connections to the Arab-Israeli conflict. The Stade de France is in the north of Paris, where there are considerable... it's a very migrant background sort of area. There are lots of people from North Africa. There are lots of people who come from areas who feel very personally connected to the Arab-Israeli conflict. That surely is an extra level of concern here.
It is. And one word you didn't use is Muslim, and that is what we really are talking about when we're talking about a migrant background here. The vast majority of those involved in the attacks in Amsterdam last week were from a Muslim background, and the real concern that they have in Paris is from the immigrant community from that Muslim background. They have been very vocal in their outrage at what has happened in Gaza, and they continue to protest, just like they do in this country, on a weekly basis. Not all Muslims taking part in the protest, but the real concern that the authorities have is that, members of that Muslim community, those who are prepared actually to enact violence, to push an agenda, the agenda in support of Gaza, could be out in force on Thursday, and that is of real concern. It's not just potential trouble in terms of fan against fan or even protester against fan, as we saw in Amsterdam, but the potential for terrorist attacks as well.
I mean,
which we've seen, of course, on many occasions in France. over the last couple of years.
I mean, I spent a semester in a university in North Paris over a decade ago, and there was quite a bit of anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli graffiti, let's just say. And that was then. Thank you very much indeed, Mark White, our Home and Security editor, with those warnings.
Yes, well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and there's plenty more coming up on today's programme. We've got the latest on the Princess of Wales and her health after her public appearance at yesterday's Remembrance service. Don't miss it.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
In 2020, after almost 80 years, Oxford University's Pitt Rivers Museum removed its famous collection of shrunken heads with sewn-up lips and eyes made by the South American Shuar and Ashwar people. How do museums decide what should be shown and what should be confined to storage? Can controversial exhibits be left on display with suitable contextualisation in captions? Who would want to be a curator facing such controversial questions? For a review, I'm delighted to be joined by journalist Eitan Smallman. Welcome to GB News. I think many people, when they hear that we're going to discuss museums or art galleries, think that it's going to be, that wokery question. But it strikes me, and I think it strikes you too, that this is not just about wokery at all. There are some really interesting ethical questions here. For example, let's start with this one, and there are several examples of it. Should we be displaying human bodies, the remains of human beings? Should we be displaying them in museums?
Absolutely. It's not just the usual suspects, young snowflakes, who are objecting to these things. There are just naturally cultural shifts, and people of all ages and all political persuasions may feel uneasy about displaying human remains of any kind, especially human remains that have been taken against the will of the communities or taken violently. Hilary Mantel led a campaign to remove a 7-foot 7-inch skeleton of Charles Byrne, known as the Irish Giant, from the Hunterian Museum. He had specifically said that he didn't want to be displayed and didn't want to be taken by anatomists, and yet was displayed for a couple of hundred years until a couple of years ago. He hasn't had the burial he requested, but he's no longer on public display.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's now 10 to 2. And the Princess of Wales returned to official duties this weekend following her extensive cancer treatment.
Yes, she joined King Charles and other members of the royal family to pay tribute on Remembrance Sunday, watching the memorial from the balcony of the Foreign Office.
Well, joining us now is the editor-in-chief at Majesty magazine, Ingrid Seward. Ingrid, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. First of all, of course, the country has been on tenterhooks in terms of seeing whether or not the Princess of Wales would turn up today. We did know a couple of days in advance. Does this indicate that she'll be back to a much more regular royal schedule?
Well, I think it does, because she's only had 3 official engagements this year, and it's really that her husband, Prince William, said, I think we'll be seeing, hopefully we'll be seeing, she'll be doing a lot more next year. But he didn't say she'll be taking on a full round of engagements. He said she'll be doing a lot more, and I think they're expecting to do some European tours, but maybe not any further than that. So she's obviously still being advised to take it gently because she's been obviously through something really, really unpleasant and difficult, the likes of which we will probably never know. But I think the fact that we knew that she was having cancer because she told us has really helped a great many people and made them even more endeared to her. I mean, certainly she has an enormous fan base of people who just adore her.
Ingrid, I don't know if you've seen, but there was a bit of a row over Twitter in the last couple of days. A regular panellist on Good Morning Britain tweeted something really quite hurtful, saying, why has Kate aged so much? Isn't she only 42? Is she a smoker? It's the only explanation. Now, I ask you about this because this is now leading on the Mail Online, and of course people are clicking on it like crazy. It's just the most ghastly thing to say about a woman who's been suffering from cancer, and I do wonder, this type of bullying that goes on social media towards Princess Catherine.
Well, I didn't realise that she was such a big recipient of it, but everybody's a recipient of it. I'm sure you are. I have been. Anyone who's remotely puts their face above the parapet seems to be a recipient of it, and it's absolute. It's just nastiness. The trouble is people take notice of it. I just think that's the most unpleasant and ridiculous thing to say, and so obviously untrue. So, I mean, of course, she's not going to look 100%, but she does sometimes. And she's not going to look 100% after she's, suffered cancer and an abdominal operation. But she manages pretty well, and I just think it's ridiculous. I don't think people should take any notice of it. The more notice people take of it, as I'm sure you know, the more it gets it going.
Well, Ingrid Seward, thank you so much for talking us through all of that. Really appreciate your time here on Good Afternoon Britain.
Disgusting thing to say. Anyway, we'll be back in a tick.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Up until yesterday, some parts of the UK had 0 hours of sunshine so far this November. That's all about to change. Still some patchy cloud, but increasingly sunny spells over the next couple of days as a cleaner area of high pressure builds in, this time without the gloom. Having said that, there is still some low cloud as we end the day across the far southwest of Cornwall. It's a patchy cloud elsewhere, but it's less low and less widespread, and so it's a clearer night for many places. Under those clear skies, nevertheless, there will be some fog forming, especially for Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England, Southern Scotland, as well as the West Midlands. That fog will cause poor visibility first thing, so watch out for that. But where we don't have the fog, actually a bright start to the day. A chilly start, a frost in places, particularly for central and northern Scotland. But actually, bright skies and mostly dry with light winds for many. It's going to be pleasant enough. The dense fog across Northern Ireland could be slow to clear, might last all day in 1 or 2 spots, equally for Northern England and Southern Scotland. But for much of the rest of the UK, well, a fine start to Tuesday beckons, and we'll see some showers just brush the far southeast, but these will come and go, and they will be largely confined to coastal parts of Norfolk, Suffolk and Kent. Now into Tuesday afternoon, some cloud will build, but the best of the sunshine remains across the southwest, as well as parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland away from the mistier areas. It's going to feel pleasant, with temperatures reaching 10 to 12 Celsius, but a cold wind continues to affect East Anglia and the southeast. That's the wind that will bring in the showers, and they'll continue overnight. And where we see some clear spells, once again, a few fog patches will return. But otherwise, Wednesday's a reasonably bright day, cloudier skies in the north, and a return to some cloud on Thursday as well.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's only 2 weeks remaining to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,000 and £25 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag will get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2 or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan Tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Monday, the 11th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Keir Starmer has been in Paris as he marks Armistice Day in the French capital. But could his visit to see Emmanuel Macron actually be primarily focused on the new challenge of handling Donald Trump?
Yes, Donald Trump has already been in conversation with Vladimir Putin over Ukraine. Putin denies that phone call ever took place. But could the president-elect now expect a united Franco-British proposal to boost weapon delivery ahead of Trump's inauguration?
And amid it all, the COP Climate Conference kicks off in Baku. The Prime Minister is jetting there as we speak after his meetings with Macron. And on the agenda today, cash, cash, cash. Developing companies, or indeed countries, want your money to deal with the effects of climate change. Will the Prime Minister hand it over?
Also tonight, a GB News exclusive. Patrick Christie's will grill Boris Johnson on everything from Brexit to COVID as the former Prime Minister opens up about his time in office.
But never forget, it was we who controlled it because we took back control with Brexit.
I'm really interested for this Boris Johnson interview tonight on Patrick Christie's Tonight, because it really gets to the nub of all of these issues that really are leading the programme today, these forward-thinking issues. I mean, this meeting between Macron and Starmer, what will Ukraine look like? I mean, what will Boris Johnson, who's been meeting Donald Trump over the course of the last year or so on multiple occasions, he was there at the RNC, he's been meeting with Donald Trump, talking primarily about Ukraine. What's his sense of what will actually happen there now?
Yeah, so Patrick conducted this interview yesterday after the Remembrance Sunday commemorations. Donald Trump, Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson.
Same colour hair.
Same colour hair. Boris Johnson, hot-footed it from the Cenotaph over to our Westminster studio for this. And it's a long interview. It's 45 minutes, getting to know what Boris Johnson thinks about current issues, but also whether, he might want to rethink some of the things that he did in power. Perhaps he might want to apologise for some policies as well. It does sound as though he's got quite a bit to say about Ukraine that might surprise you. Lots on immigration and the illegal migration issue, so it should be a corker.
But also, of course, relevant to today, all the climate stuff. I mean, Boris Johnson made COP26, that was COP 4 years ago, the sort of centrepiece of his administration. And I just remembering back to that time in Glasgow, it's so interesting. At that point, Boris Johnson was unassailable. He was double digits ahead in the polls. He had his biggest Tory majority since Margaret Thatcher. He was briefing, or at least the papers were writing, that he was going to be Prime Minister for a decade. And it was during that conference that the Owen Paterson scandal broke. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, the first stories about Partygate dripped out as well. COP, when he was Prime Minister, was sort of the last time he was fully, unassailably in charge.
Yeah, and I know a lot of you at home are divided over Boris Johnson. Some of you loved Boris Johnson, thought he was a great Prime Minister, was very sad to see the back of him. Others of you couldn't forgive him for his policies during the COVID pandemic, or perhaps on the issue of immigration as well. So it'll be interesting to see Boris Johnson reflect a little on his premiership.
Absolutely. Well, of course, that is all tonight from 9 p.m. here on GB News. And if you've got thoughts about it, do get in touch. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved with this programme. But, of course, all of that's to come after your news headlines with Katie Bowen.
Tom, Emily, thank you and good afternoon. It's just gone 2 o'clock. These are your latest headlines from the GB Newsroom. The nation fell silent this morning to mark Armistice Day, honouring the moment peace was declared in 1918 on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month with a 2-minute silence. A service has taken place at the Cenotaph in London where wreaths have been laid and prayers have been read and a procession of the congregation took place. Senior representatives of the Armed Forces and the Ministry of Defence have attended a service at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. The Duchess of Edinburgh also spoke at the service. While the Prime Minister has marked Armistice Day in France today, becoming the first UK leader to do so since Sir Winston Churchill. And ahead of the commemorations, Keir Starmer and President Emmanuel Macron spoke about the war in Ukraine and the situation in the Middle East. The two leaders laid a floral tribute at the tomb of the unknown soldier at the Arc de Triomphe. According to a Downing Street spokesman, the two leaders also spoke about the situation in the Channel, with the leaders strongly agreeing on the importance of bearing down on illegal migration at every stage of a migrant's journey. Minister for Veterans Alistair Carnes spoke to Eamon and Isabel this morning.
Well, I think going out there makes absolute sense from my perspective. The war was fought in France, so being alongside the French to remember those that have fallen is fantastic news. And I fully support it. I had the privilege yesterday of marching for the first time in the front rank of veterans past the Cenotaph, and it's a moment for this country to reflect and remember the sacrifices of so many people who laid down their lives to protect the freedoms we enjoy. So the PM going over to France is a good thing to stand along the French and remember the sacrifice that took place.
Elsewhere, the Kremlin has today denied reports that US President-elect Donald Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin, casting the media reports as pure fiction. The Washington Post and Reuters news agency both previously reported that the call had taken place. It comes as Joe Biden is reportedly set to make a personal plea to Donald Trump about the importance of funding Ukraine, urging the president-elect not to walk away from the country. Meanwhile, Russia reportedly suffered its deadliest day of the war so far, with 1,770 troops killed yesterday. A short time ago, Ukrainian military warned that Russia is preparing to step up their offensive in the south of the country. The number of small boat migrants crossing the English Channel is likely to hit 40,000 by the end of the year, according to maritime security sources, as almost 33,000 have now made the illegal journey so far this year. Over the weekend, a further 781 migrants crossed from France. The latest crossings come just days after Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer entered into a new agreement to intercept criminal gangs smuggling migrants through the Western Balkans. Sir Keir announced deals to boost intelligence sharing and cooperation with Serbia, North Macedonia and Kosovo. A Home Office spokesman said that we will stop at nothing to bring the people smuggling gangs to justice. The leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, has been giving evidence at the Post Office inquiry today. She's being questioned about her time as business secretary. Badenoch says that she was vaguely aware of the issues with the Horizon IT system, but was unfamiliar with the full detail of what had gone wrong and what the postmasters had endured. She went on to say that bureaucracy got in the way of redress too much of the time, blaming what she called the government machine. Former soldier Daniel Khalif has pleaded guilty partway through his trial at Woolwich Crown Court to escaping from HMP Wandsworth in September 2023, but he denies all of the charges. The 23-year-old escaped from HMP Wandsworth in southwest London in September last year by clinging to the underside of a food delivery truck using a sling made from kitchen trousers. Khalif faces charges contrary to the Official Secrets Act and Terrorism Act and is accused of perpetrating a bomb hoax. And finally, the annual UN climate conference is getting underway in Azerbaijan today, with world leaders, including Sir Keir Starmer, attending the summit over the next 2 weeks. The climate negotiations are set to discuss funds for poor countries to cope with climate change and increasing ambitions on cutting emissions. The meeting is being held in the wake of the latest deadly weather events, including floods in Valencia and Hurricane Helene in the US. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now let's go back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 2, and Sir Keir Starmer marked Armistice Day at a ceremony in Paris this morning, the first Prime Minister to do so since Winston Churchill. This as he laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier alongside British and French veterans.
Yes, Keir Starmer met with French President Emmanuel Macron ahead of the commemorations, discussing how to put Ukraine into the strongest possible position going into the winter.
Well, the leaders also strongly agreed on the importance of bearing down on illegal migration, as Starmer set out his mission to disrupt and deter smuggling gangs across Europe.
OK, well, for more on this, we're joined by former political editor of The Guardian, Michael White. Michael, what do you think the motivation here is from Keir Starmer to first be in Paris for Armistice Day, but also with these ongoing discussions with the French president?
Well, it seemed to, as one of you said a moment ago, it struck me as a good idea. We did our job yesterday, like we do, on the Sunday, and so he's free and he went, and symbolism matters in these things. And, of course, the French suffered far worse than we did in the First World War. It's a bit like Ukraine. Most of the battles were fought on French territory, a bit like the Russians are doing now. And well done. Churchill did it in 1944, and here we are again. But it's a good idea.
Of course, behind all of this is the sort of, I don't know, the looming ghost of Donald Trump. And how this is changing international relations, changing plans, particularly regarding Ukraine, but also trade. Significantly, this meeting that was had before the ceremony will have touched on all of those political points.
Yeah, it must be pretty scary for everybody because whatever you think of Mr. Trump, he's a very unpredictable. In fact, he prides in many ways of being unpredictable. He's pretty hostile to us all on tariffs. And we may think we'll be able to cut a separate deal from the Europeans. Don't know, and nor do they. And probably nor does Mr. Trump at this stage. And as you said a moment ago, Ukraine, funny thing in the last week, it's not just Mr. Trump's supporters who are saying, well, Ukraine will have to cut a compromise, they'll have to lose territory. The head of MI6, X1, said this last week. It was really surprising. He was very candid, say, look, they're not going to win this war. They'll have to concede territory. And I just heard General Dannett, who was the head of the British Army quite recently. He said the same thing on the radio this morning. And several other important have said it too. Suddenly, it's the flavour of the moment. Even Peter Mandelson, we're told a candidate to be the ambassador in Washington. So suddenly, we're all getting realistic about poor old Ukraine and poor Mr. Zelensky. I don't know what he feels about it, but a lot of Ukrainians are world weary, and we'd all like a deal. Of course we could, but at what price?
Well, this is the question, isn't it? Kemi Badenoch, the new Conservative leader, has been saying to the press that this is what the new Labour government has to focus on, getting a trade agreement with the United States. But it does appear that Keir Starmer is far more comfortable speaking to his continental counterparts.
Well, I think you've got to deal with where you are, and neither Mr. Trump as president nor Mr. Biden as president did much good for the famous deal between the US and the UK on trade. No surprise there, really. Obama did warn us all that time ago. So you're trying to, get decent trade deals with everyone, and they're both very difficult. The Americans drive a very hard bargain, and the Europeans will say, well, you voted to leave, and you'll have to do it the painful way. But that's true of everybody at the moment. We're entering into a more of a protectionist, nationalistic view of trade. And China is the big one, but we'll all be affected by whatever Trump decides to do with China. And that's not clear either, like everything else.
Yet Brexit could be our big get-out-of-jail-free card here if Donald Trump wants to impose this universal minimum tariff against every country in the world, friend or foe alike, unless, of course, he's got a trade deal with one of those countries. I mean, surely we should be going hell for leather in trying to achieve this, given where we left off when Donald Trump left office the last time. We'd been through 3 or 4 different rounds of negotiation. There was the shape of the deal there under the former Trade Secretary Liz Truss. Is it simply just politically unpalatable for the new government to pick up where Liz Truss left off? Or do you think they should leave politics to the side of it?
I'm not sure how far Liz Truss had got with that or with anything else. She talked up a big game but didn't necessarily deliver it. No, I don't think Starmer, who's pretty pragmatic in most ways, would be too snooty to take up a trade deal with the US. In fact, I'm sure he'd love it. But he also knows we live next door to the Europeans, and we've got to try and find a new accommodation. We're not going to rejoin the EU or anything like that, I don't think. I might be wrong, but I don't think so. So, you have to make the best of what you've got, the hand you've got, which is a difficult one both in Europe and now with Mr. Trump. He's an unabashed economic nationalist.
Well, Michael White, thank you very much indeed. You're the former political editor of The Guardian. Thank you for your time. It'll be very interesting to see what happens, eh?
Yeah. I have a feeling that the universality of this general tariff that Trump proposed in the campaign probably won't end up being completely universal.
That's what I think.
And lots of different countries will get lots of little carve-out deals. The question is, will we be lumped in with Europe, or will we get our own unique deal that allows for low tariffs or no tariffs?
Unique deal. That's what we want.
Well, we do have a independent trade policy now. It would be a shame if the government didn't use it. Joining us now to discuss more on the Ukraine side of things, however, is the defence editor at The Telegraph, Con Coughlin. Con, thanks so much for joining us. There is, of course, a great anxiety now across Europe about what does a deal look like if Trump tries to do one, and frankly, how can Ukraine get itself into the best possible decision before the 21st of January, at which point Donald Trump becomes president?
Well, good afternoon. Yes, I think there's certainly a lot of people now giving a lot of serious attention to Ukraine and how this war is going to play out. I mean, first of all, on the battlefield itself, there's a lot of activity as both sides, both the Ukrainians and Russia, try to secure as much territory as possible in advance of any future peace talks. And over the weekend, we've heard some people who are quite close to the Trump campaign saying, for example, that Ukraine should recognize that it's not going to get Crimea back. Well, this is quite a big ask of the Ukrainians, and President Zelensky has said many times that the war won't end until they've reclaimed Crimea, which, you know, the peninsula is currently a major naval base for the Russians, but the Ukrainians say is an integral part of the Ukrainian nation. So, you know, there's a lot going on, and then you've got what looks like a sort of rift between the Europeans, with the Germans, the French, the British, and others saying we've got to give Ukraine everything it needs to win this war, and the indications from the incoming Trump administration that they're not really interested in giving Ukraine any more weapons and want to see a deal. So there's many moving parts, but we don't really know how this is going to be resolved yet.
And what do we know about what Joe Biden might be planning over the next 2 months? There's been talk that he might want to expedite sending weapons over to Ukraine. He might want to pump extra money in, fearing that Donald Trump may put the stopper on all of that. He's got some decisions to make.
He has, but I can't help feeling that this is a bit too little too late. I mean, over the weekend, again, the Biden administration was indicating that it might, after all, give the Ukrainians permission to use long-range missiles to attack targets in Russia, something that they've refused to do throughout the summer, and which has cost the Ukrainians dear, because particularly after they took Kursk, the Russians massed forces to retake the Kursk region. If Ukraine could have attacked those Russian positions in Russia, that could have slowed things down enormously. But so when Joe Biden is now saying, well, perhaps we can do this and we can give you a bit more ammo before I leave office next in January, as I said, it's max to me of being a little too late.
Absolutely extraordinary how these countries that have been dragging their feet for such a long time, but giving so much money while they drag their feet over what weapons can be used. I mean, it just smacks of... when the inquiry happens over how the West handled the Ukraine war, I cannot wait to see these politicians, if they're still around, just be put through the ringer on this, because there have been so many bad decisions, slow decisions, decisions that actually we could have used less money, but more tactical nous, and things would be in a better place than they are now.
Well, it's a very good point. And you know, fundamentally, the West's approach since February 2022, when Russia launched a so-called special military operation in Ukraine, has been to give Ukraine the needs to defend itself, but not to win the war. That has been the policy, right? And as you say, the Biden administration in particular has dragged its feet on a number of key equipment issues, from providing tanks to F-16 fighters, and this issue of giving permissions for long-range missiles to be used as they're designed to be used to hit the enemy where it hurts. I mean, all these issues have shown the West not in a very favourable light. And I think, as you say, when people reflect on this conflict, this has not been the West's finest hour.
Well, Con Coughlin, on that note, thank you very much indeed, Defence Editor at The Telegraph. Great to speak to you.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Next, we tackle the upcoming COP29 summit and find out why the world's biggest polluters have dodged this climate conference.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The former royal correspondent for the Sun newspaper, Charles Ray. Good to see you this morning, Charles, and so good to see Catherine back to work with a hug.
It is. It's fantastic. I mean, there are a few royal jobs that touch at the heartstrings, and this is certainly one of those. And I think it's the first time we've actually seen Catherine back in a royal duty since she herself confirmed that she'd finished chemotherapy.
Done so much, haven't they, the Princess of Wales and the King, to raise awareness for these cancers.
Here we have both the King and Catherine having, explained to the nation and the rest of the world that they were battling, or are still battling, cancer, just like everyone else.
How sincere is all of this? I mean, it looks like she's a wonderful, kind, caring woman, but I don't know. I've never met her.
Well, She is a wonderful, kind, caring woman. That is without a shadow of a doubt. And they heard, or William heard about this young lady on a visit to the air ambulance, and they invited her because she's a photographer, so she wanted to take. She has a bucket list and wanted to take pictures of an investiture. I mean, make no mistake, people like Catherine are just absolutely wonderful in what they do and how they do it. I mean, and Catherine is the superstar of the royal family. Of that, there is no doubt.
It's the cockles of my heart, Charles. It really does. It's really good to see you. Thanks very much.
All the
Thanks,
best.
Charles. Thanks. And Liz, who is this 16-year-old amateur photographer who was hugged by Princess of Wales yesterday, has said it was a dream come true.
I bet it was.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Welcome back. It's 2:23. Now, world leaders, or at least some of them, are heading to COP29, the annual UN meeting to tackle climate change.
Yes, it's all ironically taking place in oil-rich Azerbaijan. And the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, is seeking to lead the world in achieving decarbonised electricity grid by 2030. But could Donald Trump jeopardise all that might be achieved?
OK, well, we're joined by our political correspondent, Olivia Utley. Well, Olivia, Ed Miliband certainly backs himself.
He absolutely does. He's hoping that Britain can lead the way on climate change, and the unspoken subtext to that is that Britain can lead the way now that America is going to be taking a step back. Over the weekend, the New York Times reported that Donald Trump was planning to pull America out of the Paris Climate Agreement yet again. He did that back during his last presidency, and he is apparently hoping to do it again. It is also likely that America will pull out of this $1 trillion fund that developed nations are attempting to raise to help underdeveloped nations to decarbonise. Now, Britain, under Ed Miliband and Keir Starmer, is hoping to sort of plug that gap, but it might be quite difficult, partly because Rachel Reeves in her budget refused to renew that £2.5 billion commitment from the UK, which has been made before. So there does seem to be a bit of a black hole in funding there. I think the other challenge for Keir Starmer is that he might be speaking to a bit of an empty room. There are all sorts of world leaders who have decided not to go along to COP29 this year. Ursula von der Leyen isn't going, Emmanuel Macron isn't going, Olaf Scholz isn't going. He might be speaking to a bit of an empty room. I think there is going to be a huge challenge for the leaders who are gathered at this conference in Azerbaijan. How do they plug that gap, which America under Donald Trump will no doubt leave behind?
Really pertinent question there. I suppose the other question is, given that this is a conference that's all about, frankly, how much money can we give to the developing world rather than how much climate change can we actually stop, where does that leave the UK's sort of world-leading commitments to stop drilling any oil, to not frack any gas, to leave our abundant natural resources in the ground? I mean, are any countries actually going to follow us?
Well, it's very, very difficult. As you say, this COP conference is being nicknamed the finance conference. It all seems to be about raising that $1 trillion fund for developing nations. Of course, the problem for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves is that they've left themselves with very, very little wiggle room during their election campaign. The pledges that they made not to raise taxes. We saw in the budget how much difficulty they had in trying to sort of rein in their spending. So how on earth can they afford the sort of spending commitments that the COP29 delegates are hoping that the UK is going to promise? Whether the UK can continue to meet its net zero targets while also financing these underdeveloped nations remains to be seen. I think one thing which does undermine the message that Keir Starmer is giving out today is that BP, which is a London-listed company, is planning to spend £8.5 trillion over the next 26 years on oil and gas drilling in Azerbaijan itself. So how exactly that fits with Ed Miliband's net zero commitments remains to be seen.
Startling. Olivia Rutley, thank you very much, our political correspondent there in Westminster. Thank you.
Delightful when a British-listed company chooses to spend billions of pounds in Azerbaijan rather than in Britain because we won't let them drill any more oil in Britain.
And Azerbaijan gets to look like the good guys on the international stage hosting a climate change conference. Funny world we live in, isn't it?
Well, let's speak now with the head of policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation, Harry Wilkinson. Harry, this is an interesting time. Why do you think so few world leaders are actually turning up to this year's Congress of the Parties?
Well, I think we're seeing the whole COP process under enormous pressure, perhaps more than ever before. We've had the election of Trump, which puts a bit of a negative atmosphere in the room, given that he is so opposed to a lot of what's being done at this conference, and he looks likely to withdraw America from the Paris Climate Change Agreement. But of course, over a number of years, we've had this building tension from the developing countries who want that funding to bring them along the renewables journey that more developing countries have, or developed countries have embarked upon. However, it's really hard to see how this will benefit those countries when you see that the UK has the most expensive electricity prices in the world for both domestic and industrial consumers. So it's really hard to see how they could seek to replicate that. What we need is cheap energy, abundant energy that can be clean energy if it's done right, but the only way we'll get there is through competition. Competition reveals the cheapest way to get to that scenario, whereas the approach that Ed Miliband seems to be embarking on is picking winners in every single area. We have compulsory targets for electric...
Hang on, Harry, hasn't Ed Miliband actually been a great free market champion, at least in one area? OK, we'll forget the oil and gas for a second, which he's told everyone to stop doing. But, I mean, doesn't the previous government have a lot of blame to bear when they banned onshore wind farms? So even if we wanted the market to decide if these are viable or not, you're not allowed to build them. Well, Ed Miliband's got rid of that ban. He's also approving more solar farms as well. I mean, these were things that were practically illegal to build in the UK before. Now, Ed Miliband seems to be on the side of the market. Let the stuff be built.
Well, it's a good question. But, you know, the reality is that no renewables are being built without subsidies. We simply, and that goes the same for all energy infrastructure. We just don't have a market that's capable of finding out what the total cost of an energy generator is. You know, that is the initial building costs, of course, but it's those system costs as well. You know, when we see renewables, we have to account for the costs that they don't always work all the time, and we may have to back them up either with batteries or with fossil fuel power. So, you know, what I would like to see is an energy market that can incorporate all of those costs, and we have competition on a fair basis, even including carbon costs as well. But we don't have that situation at the moment. So all that is going to happen from having more wind right now is more expense for consumers as we see those bills go up, because those balancing costs, those increased needs for transmission lines, more grid infrastructure. That is all adding more money every single year. And the result of that is clear to see. We have such expensive electricity prices, so no one can say that's been successful in bringing prices down.
OK, well, Harry Wilkinson, Head of Policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation, thank you very much indeed for your time. And I do wonder, if we got to this $1 trillion to help developing countries adapt to climate change and the like, do you think we'd ever have, the evidence there of exactly where it's been spent, exactly whether it's done what we promised it was going to do, exactly where it's been used in all of those countries? I'm not so sure, after the World Bank couldn't account for £40 billion of it. $40 billion of it.
You suggesting some dictator who's come to power in a violent coup isn't going to account for every last penny of climate finance that they happen to receive?
I don't trust any government to account for all the money they spend anyway. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Up next, the Archbishop of Canterbury refuses to resign after a damning review into the Church of England's handling of allegations of serious abuse. That's next after the headlines.
Tom, Emily, thank you. Your top stories this hour. The nation fell silent this morning to mark Armistice Day, honouring the moment peace was declared in 1918 on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month with a 2-minute silence. A service has taken place at the Cenotaph in London, where wreaths have been laid and prayers have been read, and a procession of the congregation took place. Senior representatives of the Armed Forces and the Ministry of Defence have attended a service at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. The Duchess of Edinburgh also spoke at the service. Well, the Prime Minister has marked Armistice Day in France today, becoming the first UK leader to do so since Sir Winston Churchill. And ahead of the commemorations, Sir Keir Starmer and President Emmanuel Macron spoke about the war in Ukraine and the situation in the Middle East. The two leaders laid a floral tribute at the tomb of the unknown soldier at the Arc de Triomphe. According to a Downing Street spokesman, the two leaders also spoke about the situation in the Channel, with the leaders strongly agreeing on the importance of bearing down on illegal migration at every stage of a migrant's journey. Minister for Veterans, Alistair Carnes, spoke to Eamon and Isabel this morning.
Well, I think going out there makes absolute sense from my perspective. The war was fought in France, so being alongside the French to remember those that have fallen is fantastic news. And I fully support it. I had the privilege yesterday of marching for the first time in the front rank of veterans past the Cenotaph, and it's a moment for this country to reflect and remember the sacrifices of so many people who laid down their lives to protect the freedoms we enjoy. So the PM going over to France is a good thing to stand along the French and remember the sacrifice that took place.
Elsewhere, former soldier Daniel Khalif has pleaded guilty partway through his trial at Woolwich Crown Court to escaping from HMP Wandsworth in September 2023, but he continues to deny all other charges. The 23-year-old escaped from HMP Wandsworth in southwest London in September last year by clinging to the underside of a food delivery truck using a sling made from kitchen trousers. Khalif faces charges contrary to the Official Secrets Act and Terrorism Act and is accused of perpetrating a bomb hoax. The number of small boat migrants crossing the English Channel is likely to hit 40,000 by the end of the year, according to maritime security sources, as almost 33,000 have now made the illegal journey so far this year. Over the weekend, a further 781 migrants crossed from France. The latest crossings come just days after Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer entered into a new agreement to intercept criminal gangs smuggling migrants through the Western Balkans. Sir Keir announced deals to boost intelligence sharing and cooperation with Serbia, North Macedonia and Kosovo. A Home Office spokesman said, "We will stop at nothing to bring the people smuggling gangs to justice." Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More from the newsroom in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello and welcome back to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Last week we had the anti-cyclonic gloom. The next few days we've still got high pressure, this time without the gloom. It's much brighter for many of us. Still some patchy cloud around because we've got some areas of cloud floating around the high pressure from the Atlantic. But as this front clears, it clears the low cloud, the really gloomy stuff. So a much brighter day to come for the vast majority. Still some low cloud and mist clinging onto the southwest of Cornwall. But elsewhere across the UK, well, yeah, there's some high cloud about, but otherwise it's a brighter day with some decent sunny spells developing and feeling pleasant enough in the sunshine, although a cold wind blows through the north of Scotland and down the North Sea coast. That wind will also bring some showers into the far north of Scotland and also eastern parts of England, prone to 1 or 2 showers as we end the day. But for the vast majority, it's a dry and clear end to Monday. Already by this stage, some mist patches starting to form across Northern Ireland, Northern England, central and southern Scotland. And really with those clear skies remaining overnight and a relatively cold airflow, we're going to see increasingly some mist and fog developing, especially for Ireland and into the West Midlands, Northern England, central and southern Scotland. Where that fog forms, it will be dense with some poor visibility by dawn. Equally, we've got a few showers rolling into the southeast of England, but elsewhere, away from the fog and away from the showers, temperatures dipping close to freezing. So a chilly start to Tuesday, and the fog, where it ends up, will be slow to clear, especially for Northern Ireland and central Scotland. But away from the foggy areas, well, plenty of bright weather once again. A few more showers into the southeast and a cold wind here, but in the sunshine elsewhere, feeling pleasant enough.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. We're seeing slow traffic in Manchester, firstly on the M61 southbound, busy but moving at junction 1, the Swinton interchange. It's also slow for the M62 eastbound. That's due to an earlier broken down vehicle at junction 21 for Milnrow. Slow traffic for the M5 northbound in the West Midlands to join the M6 at junction 8. We've got queues in Kent on the M25 QE2 bridge clockwise. It's due to a rolling roadblock for a broken down vehicle between junction 31 Lakeside and 1A for Dartford. On the M3 northbound in Surrey, we've got a lane closed for recovery work due to an earlier car fire between junction 3 Lightwater and 2 for the M25, and queues on the M25 clockwise in Hertfordshire in the roadworks just before junction 23 South Mims. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
OK, good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 2, now 39 minutes past 2, and Martin Dobney is up next at 3 o'clock. Martin, what have you got for us on your show?
Well, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who came and said hello yesterday at Remembrance Sunday down at the Cenotaph as I frequented the taverns of Westminster. Thank you one and all. And today it just got better. I'll be joined in the studio by John King, a World War II veteran who's 100 years old today on Armistice Day. What a day to celebrate. He'll be joining me in the studio to share his reflections on the fact he survived when his ship was torpedoed in World War II, one of only 50 who survived. What an honour and a privilege it will be to have him in the studio. Secondly, I'll be joined by John Perez. He's a multi-millionaire hotelier and he owns a global drinks brand. He's just announced he's not investing £20 million in expanding his business because he thinks that Labour's budget is anti-entrepreneur and anti-business. Plus, as the Keir Starmer gallivants to Paris, I'll point out why 8 trade deals with United States out of 50, don't forget, total more than the combined trade deals we've got with the European Union. All eyes are on America. Will Sir Keir Starmer do the right thing for Britain or the right thing for Brussels? That's all coming up 3 till 6.
Sounds like an absolute corker of a show, Martin, and a very big happy birthday to John King as well. Can't wait to see what he has to say. You're, of course, on from 3 o'clock.
100 years old on Armistice Day.
Oh, it's
fantastic,
yeah.
Fantastic. Also, I did read about that business man who said he's, going to give up 20 million in potential investment. Not a great look, is it?
Well, something else isn't a great look today, and that's the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. He's facing mounting pressure to resign following a damning report into the suspected abuse of over 100 children by a well-known barrister associated with the Church of England.
Yes, the report claims that the institution played a role in covering up the accusations when details initially came to light in 2013. Now, momentum is building. The Bishop of Newcastle has added her name to the list of names, calling for Welby to resign.
Well, earlier we heard from Dr. Philip Kisley from the New Culture Forum, who feels that the victims are simply not getting justice.
Abuse that happened in the 70s and 80s, it came to light in 2013. Justin Welby knew about it. There are, as you say, Tom, over 130 boys who've been violently abused here, violently and sexually abused. 2 of these boys were hit over 8,000 times. Okay, and this cover-up is pretty typical. The abuser, John Smythe, died in 2018. So, like Jimmy Savile, he has escaped justice. And this is one of our great institutions failing children again. I think one of the key things here is the idea of justice should be public. It's the old adage, justice should be seen to be done. And perpetrators need to be publicly shamed. If you are indulging in shameful and sadistic acts, then you need to be shamed for 2 reasons. Because that is a kind of punishment, but also it's a deterrent to other people. Now, that's massively important when it comes to child abuse, okay? And I think I'm just worried about what else is going to come out because this has been, let go. How many other instances have been swept under the carpet? On the one hand, it's gross hypocrisy, okay? And people loathe that, and people absolutely loathe that when it comes to the sadistic abuse of children. But it calls into question, actually, what he thinks Christian charity is. If he's looking at an abuser of children, an abuser of boys, and saying, "Oh well, that I'm assuming there's some kind of mechanism of forgiveness that's gone on there," and he's certainly forgiving himself in his own mind through his, in relation to his negligent actions. I don't understand, and again, this is a big thing in our society. I don't understand what the moral code is here. Everything seems to be upside down. It seems to be that the victims are being punished, and they're being punished because they're getting no justice, Emily. And the perpetrators are getting off scot-free. We've got a real problem. Yes, it's been going on for years, and of course we had a different kind of problem in the 70s and 80s where people just got away with these things. We haven't moved on because people are still getting away with them. The problem now is that people are making ridiculous excuses for the most vile behaviour.
Well, in a response to the review, the Archbishop of Canterbury said this in a statement. "I recognise the courage of all those victims, including those related to John Smythe, who have come forward and relived their trauma through contributing to this review. I know their willingness to share their painful testimonies will come at great personal cost. I had no idea or suspicion of this abuse before 2013.
Nevertheless, the review is clear that I personally failed to ensure that after disclosure in 2013, the awful tragedy was energetically investigated. Since that time, the way in which the Church of England engages with victims and survivors has changed beyond recognition."
Well, those are the words of the Archbishop. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Coming up, could living in an ugly building be bringing down your mood? We answer that important question.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
We shot with the London Eye in the background, so it's quite an iconic shoot to do my cover of the Playboy magazine.
And you moved into the mansion for a while. Hugh called you the British Carmen Electra. You were one of his favourites, and it's renowned for its parties, of course. Over there, you must have had a few of those. Must have been wild times.
Fantastic parties, yeah. I mean, I met some incredible people. I will forever respect him and everyone at Playboy for the love and the support.
And you're on giant billboards, you're modelling for Nike, for Reebok, you're earning thousands of pounds a day.
Well,
absolutely like living the dream in terms of a model's lifestyle, and then things began to change.
Well, I've been living in Windsor for 4 years, and I can't get back into Windsor at the moment. The rents have gone ridiculous. I was paying $550 a month, and then the landlord just turned around one day and said I need to be paying $750. And I didn't really have a proper tenancy agreement, and I looked through it and I said, oh, can we get something in writing? And he was like, oh. So in the end, I wrote a tenancy agreement out from off the internet and I got it all signed. But then he went, if you're not going to pay the extra £250 a month, then you're going to have to move out. And I was like, well, you're going to have to give me 4 weeks. I can't just move out. I've got nowhere to go. And I think he thought he could just throw me out there and then. And he said, I've got someone that's going to move in that's going to pay £700-800 a month. So I went and got the 10, and I thought maybe this will be the way I can go for a few months or so, you know. And it was still summer a few months back when I became homeless. So, you know, I got the tent and I got all the cooking equipment and what have you from the money I got from some of the jobs I did. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go and be a free spirit for a bit, and I'm gonna have to just do my own thing. And you know what, it was the biggest mental relief to be able to have my own space. I mean, that was so liberating, absolutely.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 10 to 3. Now, here's one for you. Ugly buildings and shabby surroundings are fueling an epidemic of loneliness. That's all according to a new report by the Centre for Social Justice.
Yes, the think tank says there is a clear link between poor building design and a lack of community spirit, leading to social isolation, and are calling on the government to stop creating ugly developments like some of these ones we've just pictured. Sorry if you live there.
Yes, I mean, I do think there's just an intrinsic... I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of academic research that's gone into this, but just looking at those, I mean, you can sort of see it makes sense, right? Let's talk through this with the policy director at the Centre for Social Justice, Ed Davies. Ed, talk us through the research that went into this report.
Hi there, yeah, thanks for having me. So we're doing a sort of year-long look at loneliness, and there are all sorts of factors in that. We've done bits on family, we're doing some stuff on community services, on different age groups. But sort of, as you say, slightly intuitively, but also a little bit surprisingly, something that comes out of the data is where you live. What it looks like actually has a real sort of bearing on how lonely you feel about the world. So we dug into a bit and found that actually about 2/3 of adults feel lonely some or all of the time, but people who feel good about where they live, particularly if they live around green spaces and things as well, are all about only about 1/3 of those feel lonely. And so you start to look at actually what are the things that matter in your built environment to try and reduce loneliness. And it's one of those things where sort of ugliness and loneliness feel quite abstract, but actually at least targeting these things, and beauty as well, like beauty is famously in the eye of the beholder, but having beauty as there as part of your design principles to at least take it into consideration, having community spaces to be taken into consideration, having green access taken into consideration, all these different things can actually then contribute to reducing loneliness, which is a massive public health problem akin to sort of smoking, obesity, heart disease, that sort of thing. So it has real hard world impacts as well.
Very interesting. I mean, I sit next to Tom every single day. I'm not going to call you ugly, don't worry. I sit next to Tom every day. and this is something that he does not stop banging on about. The fact that we have decided to build monstrosities.
Tiny little windows.
Monstrosities with tiny little windows for people to live in, and then we expect them to be productive members of society. If you live in something that is hideous, it makes sense that you'll be more miserable.
I mean, you're absolutely right. And this is, it's the basis of broken windows theories as well. If you've come across that in crime, this is the idea that if you live in an area where people have broken windows or written graffiti, or there is this general low-level unease, that actually crime begets crime and it gets worse. And I think this is the same thing, that if you sort of live in really quite brutal surroundings, it brutalizes you. And so actually having some sort of deference to, we can try and do this beautifully, actually you'll create a slightly more beautiful environment, more beautiful people, if you will, sort of more metaphorically beautiful
so
people.
we'll get better looking if you live
beauty begets beauty. But Ed, it's interesting because there is a serious policy-related point here, and that's in the proposed National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF. The new government has proposed taking the word beauty out of that framework. I suppose you'd be calling for them to put it right back in.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, as I said, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and maybe it's subjective, and I can see why government would say, well, this isn't hard policy. But there is this element of culture eats strategy for breakfast. We need to have this culture of building beauty into our lives. And maybe that will be in the eye of the beholder, and maybe we won't all find the same things beautiful. But actually, if we're all aiming for beauty in our built environment, we are far more likely to get it than if we don't. And I think, the report as well, it's not just about sort of slightly abstract things around beauty. As I mentioned, things like green spaces, they make a real difference the way people feel about where they live. Ensuring that you have those built in is really important. If we're going to build sort of new communities, make sure they have community spaces, make sure they have areas where we can meet and build relationships. So there are sort of hard practical parts to it too.
Wasn't this the whole point of having Roger Scruton on board, the late Roger Scruton now? He spoke so much about how important beauty was in buildings. What happened to that?
Well, that became the Planning for the Future white paper that then got abandoned after the Chesham and Amersham by-election.
Right, OK.
I would say, actually, it's important to say, so Nick Boys-Smith, who took over the work from Roger Scruton, wrote the foreword to this report for us. So he's been really involved in that, and we think he's done some excellent work in this space.
Absolutely, and we love Nicholas Boys-Smith on this programme because he's done some... I think it was in the report with Roger Scruton, they did polling on what buildings people actually enjoy, what buildings people actually like. And aside from what lots of architects say, or lots of sort of high-minded people say, people generally don't like brutalist buildings. It's amazing, but there is now data to show it. Ed Davies, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's been a delight to talk through you, and it's a wonderful report. Highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah, I know. When
social justice.
When architects say, oh, we have brutalism, beautiful building, I can't help but think, are they lying?
Yeah.
Are they lying? Are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing?
I think there's a certain kind of building you have to learn to like, and they're not good. They're not good buildings. This is Good Afternoon Britain. Martin's next.
I'm on a farm tomorrow.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Up until yesterday, some parts of the UK had 0 hours of sunshine so far this November. That's all about to change. Still some patchy cloud, but increasingly sunny spells over the next couple of days as a cleaner area of high pressure builds in, this time without the gloom. Having said that, there is still some low cloud as we end the day across the far southwest of Cornwall. It's a patchy cloud elsewhere, but it's less low and less widespread, and so it's a clearer night for many places. Under those clear skies, nevertheless, there will be some fog forming, especially for Northern Ireland, parts of Northern England, Southern Scotland, as well as the West Midlands. That fog will cause poor visibility first thing, so watch out for that. But where we don't have the fog, actually a bright start to the day. A chilly start, a frost in places, particularly for central and northern Scotland. But actually, bright skies and mostly dry with light winds for many. It's going to be pleasant enough. The dense fog across Northern Ireland could be slow to clear, might last all day in 1 or 2 spots, equally for Northern England and Southern Scotland. But for much of the rest of the UK, well, a fine start to Tuesday beckons, and we'll see some showers just brush the far southeast, but these will come and go, and they will be largely confined to coastal parts of Norfolk, Suffolk and Kent. Now into Tuesday afternoon, some cloud will build, but the best of the sunshine remains across the southwest, as well as parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland away from the mistier areas. It's going to feel pleasant, with temperatures reaching 10 to 12 Celsius, but a cold wind continues to affect East Anglia and the southeast. That's the wind that will bring in the showers, and they'll continue overnight.